Republic of the Philippines.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Di pa ako nakakatulog. Parang zombie ako. The 40th session of the Senate, the first regular session of the 19th Congress, is hereby called to order. We recognize our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III, to lead the chamber in prayer.
Happy New Year and Happy New Beginning to all. Our Heavenly Father, the Almighty God who created and governs the whole universe, we come before you as the year 2023 begins, grateful for your love and grace. We give you thanks for the blessings of the past year and ask for your continued blessings in this new year. We humble ourselves before you as we worship and praise your holy name. You said in the book of Jeremiah, and I quote, "Call unto me, and I will answer you, and show you great and mighty things which you do not know." We claim your promise, O God, in the Holy Scripture, that you are going to do new, great and mighty things for our nation, as we call on you in our prayers. When Jesus was allowed by Peter to use his boat, Peter experienced a new thing in his life. His situation changed from having no catch of fish to a catch that almost broke the fishing nets and sank the boat. Here in the Senate, we allow you, God, to get in our boat so that whatever we do will be fruitful and we will live according to the calling and mandate that you have given us through our people. Today, as we start our session for this year, we pray for your guidance and blessings. We, your legislators, recognize that without you, we can do nothing. Proverbs 14:34 says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any man." We pray that you be present, O Lord, in all our undertakings so that your righteousness may manifest in everything that we will do. Let the fear of God be upon us as we make laws so that the welfare of our people will be actually served. As believers of God, we declare that this year, 2023, will be a year that God's hands of protection, provision, peace, and prosperity be upon our beloved nation. We implore that we be spared from natural calamities, pray that our people be healthy and industrious, our food production increase and be more than enough, our economy be better, and our society be just and fair to all. Bless all of us, most especially our Senate President, with wisdom and understanding as he presides over our sessions, so that every item in our agenda will be discussed fairly and productively, so we can objectively pursue the welfare of the Filipino people. Let us not rush anything here in the Senate, including and most especially our prayers. So thank you, Lord, for your continuous blessings and protection for our nation. Specifically, we ask for your protection and provision for all those who are in need, especially those who are suffering from poverty, illness, and oppression. We ask you, Lord, to bring peace to troubled regions and comfort to those who are grieving. We pray for those who are searching for hope, that in this new beginning, they may find it in you, with the Senate doing its part in giving our people hope for a better life. Amen.
Amen. And as the good gentleman, our Minority Floor Leader, greeted us a Happy New Year, we'd like to also greet him a happy birthday. Happy birthday, sir, together with Senator Pato de la Rosa. Let us remain standing for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Bayang magiging telas ng silanganan, alam na puso, sa sadyang mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tulang ka ng mag-ibig, sa manlulubi, di ka masisingil, sa lahat at mundo. lahat sa langit mong bukha. May bilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng walang at mo'y tagumpay na naglililig. Ang bituin ng araw niyang kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw, dalawa ang ating pagsinta. Buhay ang langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya dapat may mga api ang mamatay lang dahil sa'yo.
Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
Senator G. With 23 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Before we go to the business proper, if I may be allowed by my colleagues to give a short welcome back remarks to everyone. Dear ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, it is nice to see you all again, right here in the beating heart of this institution, where ideas are discussed, laws are forged, and change for the greater good is made. I do not want to call our short recess a vacation because all of us worked throughout the holidays. To cite one example, through the able leadership of Senator Cynthia Villar, we peeled the layers of mystery behind the surge of the prices of onions and the shortage of its supply. Habang pinapakinggan po natin ang hearing, parang nagbabala tayo ng sibuyas at nakakaiyak sa galit, hindi sa tuwa ang nangyari. Her Committee on Agriculture next tackled the crisis on table salt, an irony in our archipelagic country surrounded by the ocean. If concerns about our food security have migrated from staples like rice and sugar to condiments, it becomes a challenge to the Senate to help find solutions instead of merely amplifying the problem. And Senator Cynthia, together with many of our colleagues, have given out their prescriptions. I am also proud to say that this kind of constructive approach, a Senate trademark to point out cures instead of merely pointing figures, was on full display during Senator Grace Poe's masterful handling of the NAIA air navigation systems crash. After banging the gavel, it didn't take her too long, and all our colleagues present, to lift the fog of confusion and the haze of conjectures surrounding the airport meltdown, which caused pain to thousands of what ought to be a Happy New Year. Kaya naman, hindi umubra ang sino man may balak nun maging Pontius Pilato. Let me also point out that it was during the break that the Blue Ribbon Committee released its report on the DepEd computer controversy. I have been told as to the explaining the anatomy of the alleged crime, the report is incisive. As to recommending measures to prevent its repeat, it is instructional. These should be the nails to the coffin, so to speak. So this kind of anomaly should not resurrect in the future to haunt us again. Kaya maraming salamat, Senator Tol. Also, over the past few weeks, we had hearings on various bills seeking to strengthen the protection and conservation of our cultural heritage under the Committee on Culture and Arts headed by Senate President Pro Temp Lauren Legarda. The Filipino Migrant Workers Bill, expanding the free use or free legal assistance fund under the Committee on Migrant Workers headed by Senator Raffy Tulfo. Hearing on bills amending RA 11709, which prescribes the fixed terms of key officers of the AFP under the Committee on National Defense by Senator Jinggoy Estrada. And even this morning, may pahabol pa yung hearing ng Ways and Means of Senator Sherwin Gatchalian to fix the problem of pogos in our country. Lahat naman sa atin nagtatrabaho mula sa Pasko so we can hit the ground running this year. And I thank the minority for participating on all these hearings together with our distinguished colleagues who participated in these hearings. We hit the ground running because technical working groups were convened and reports were written in the run-up to the resumption of the session today. So I believe that as we restart our plenary business, we return here refreshed and raring to do our work, committed to make the first quarter of this year a productive one. I think this should be our collective New Year's resolution to craft measures not for the sake of improving our scoreboard of laws, but improving our lives of our people. Yan naman po talaga ang mahalaga. Hindi para sa atin, pero para sa bayan. With this note, let me call on the Majority Leader to guide us through the agenda for today.
Thank you,
Maraming
Mr.
salamat po.
President. Thank you very much. And it is also noteworthy that our Senate President has been doing its job 24/7. And we laud your efforts, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we continue, let me just take this opportunity to also greet our distinguished colleagues who celebrated their birthdays during the break. They are Senator J.V. Ejercito, last December 26, Senator Francis
birthday.
Tolentino, January 3, Senator Coco Pimentel, January 20, and Senator Bato de la Rosa, January 21. I move that we suspend for a minute so that we can personally greet our colleagues.
Session suspended for 1 minute. Happy birthday to the distinguished colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President.
Before we move forward, I would like to also recognize and congratulate our very hardworking Majority Floor Leader for being honored as honoris causa Doctors of Law from Bulacan State University. You are now known as Dr. Joel Villanueva, Doctor of Love.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really appreciate it.
Congratulations, Major.
We are in the company of a mutual admiration club, Mr. President. So let me also take this opportunity to congratulate our Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda, for being conferred the award of Commendatore to the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic in appreciation of her role in strengthening bilateral relations between the Philippines and Italy. Mr. President, with Senator Legarda's efforts, the Philippines was able to return to the Venice Biennale after a 51-year hiatus. This is the second recognition bestowed on Senator Legarda by the government of Italy. Again, Mr. President, we recognize and give honor to our dear colleague for this prestigious award.
And if I'm not mistaken, she was also given an Order of Cheval from the French government, a knighthood of the French government. That's why she's
Definitely
the
a legend, Mr. President.
friend of the Europeans.
Definitely a living legend, Mr.
In
President.
the Senate.
Yes, Mr. President, we'd also like to acknowledge guests from the gallery. We have with us the Secretary of the Climate Change Commission, Secretary Robert Borge, Commissioner Rachel Ann Herrera, Commissioner Albert de la Cruz, and the entire technical staff. We also with us, Mr. President, is the PSC Chairperson, Philippine Sports Commission Chairperson, Richard Bachman, PSC Executive Director, Attorney Guillermo Iroy. We also have with us, Mr. President, the Jiu-Jitsu team, Margarita Ochoa, Kimberly Ann Custodio, Stephen Campus, the coach, together with the PSC officials, guest of our distinguished colleague, Senator Bongo. We welcome them to this August chamber together with our dear colleague, son Manolo Angara, the son of Senator Sani Angara, who is present here today.
The improved version of Sani Angara, Manolo Angara, is here with us.
Yes, Mr. President. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome all of them.
The better looking Angara.
The
So,
gentleman
please
is
proceed,
trying to object,
Majority.
Mr. President. Let us not...
Actually, we should be proud that our children overcome overpass our achievements.
Yes, Mr. President.
We'll be proud that our children will be better than us.
That defines the success of an individual.
Of an
Mr.
individual,
President.
of a
Mr.
good parent.
President, yes, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 39th session, December 14, 2022, and consider the same as approved.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Leader, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection to the motion, Secretary will now proceed with the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 1611, promoting open access in internet services and for other purposes. Senator Villanueva.
Referred to Committee on Science and Technology, Public Services.
1612, amending RA 9136, the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001 by Senator Villanueva.
Referred to Committees on Energy and Public Services.
1613, strengthening public-private partnerships, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Zubiri and Villanueva.
Referred to Committees on Public Works, Economic Affairs, Ways and Means and Finance.
1614, creating an advanced studies development program for exceptional employees from the government and the private sector and for other purposes. Senator Angara.
Committee on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Civil Service, and Finance.
1615, recognizing the municipality of Baler in the province of Aurora as the birthplace of Philippine surfing. Senator Angara.
Committee on Tourism, Environment, and Finance.
1616, declaring the 7th day of November of every year a special national working holiday in commemoration of the establishment of the first Philippine mosque and the introduction of Islam in the Philippines. Senator Angara.
Referred to Committees on Cultural Communities and Muslim Affairs.
1617, reorganizing and converting the Insurance Commission into a collegial body, amending sections 437, 438, and 439 of RA 10607 as amended. Senator Revilla Jr.
Committee on Banks.
1618, strengthening rural banks in the Philippines, amending further for the purpose RA 7353, as amended, Senator Revilla Jr.
Committee on Banks and Ways and Means.
1619, creating the Laguna Lake Conservation Authority, thereby repealing RA 4850 as amended, and for other purposes, Senator Revilla Jr.
Committee on Government Corporations, Environment, and Ways and Means and Finance.
16 A7160 by Senator Ejercito.
Committee on Local Government.
1636, institutionalizing the establishment of daycare centers in all national government agencies, instrumentalities, and GOCCs for the employees' children aged 5 years old and below, appropriating funds and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Women and Children and Finance.
1637, promoting community-based mental health services through hiring of at least one psychologist per city or municipality, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government.
1638, creating the office of the building official in all provinces, cities, and municipalities, and amending sections 443, 454, and 477 of RA 7116 for other purposes, Senator Ejercito.
Committees on Local Government.
1639, amending RA 7662, creating for the purpose a legal scholarship and return service program, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
1640, providing for government financial institutions unified initiatives to distress enterprises for economic recovery, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, Government Corporations, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1641, prohibiting game fixing and providing penalties for violations thereof, Senator Estrada.
To the Committees on Sports and Games and Amusements.
1642, an act amending RA 10366, otherwise known as an act authorizing the COMELEC to establish precincts assigned to accessible polling places exclusively for persons with disabilities and senior citizens, Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1643, regulating the registration, licensure, and practice of physical therapy and operating funds therefore, Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on Civil Service and Finance.
1644, reducing wastage by donating and recycling excess edible food, Senator Estrada.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, Social Justice.
1645, providing for the publication of laws in the print or online version of the official gazette and of a newspaper of general circulation, Senator Estrada.
To the Committee on Public Information, Mass Media.
1646, providing for development and modernization fund for the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines to ensure upgrades to its standards, systems, and procedures prescribed for civil aviation practices and for other purposes, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Public Services.
1647, instituting a medical reserve corps and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Legarda.
Committee on Health and Demography and Finance.
1648, providing for benefits and privileges to unpaid care workers and their families, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes, Senator Legarda.
To the Committee on Social Justice, Ways and Means of Finance.
1649, defining the maritime zones under the jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines, Senator Legarda.
Committee on Foreign Relations, National Defense and Security.
1650, providing for a system of redistributing and recycling food waste to promote food security, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Agriculture and Food, Social Justice, and Ways and Means.
1651, rationalizing the celebration of national holidays, amending for the purpose RA 9492, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Code.
1652, establishing evacuation centers in every city and municipality and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on National Defense, Public Works, and Finance.
1653, strengthening the Legal Education Board, thereby amending RA 7662 and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Higher Education, Vocational Education, Justice, Human Rights, Ways and Means and Finance.
1654, strengthening the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, amending for the purpose RA 9497 by Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Public Services.
1655, maintaining and preserving Filipino films, creating the Philippine Film Archive, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes, Senator Revilla Jr.
Committees on Public Information, Mass Media, Culture and Arts, and Finance.
1656, an act to designate September as Philippine Film Industry Month and mandate the Film Development Council of the Philippines to conduct events on various film-related disciplines during the celebration, to appropriate funds therefore, and for other purposes, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Public Information, Mass Media, and Finance.
1657, institutionalizing industry cluster-based programs and projects through interlocal cooperation and people's participation, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committees on Trade and Commerce, Local Government, Ways and Means.
1658, creating the Office of Tanod Bata and providing funds therefore, Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Women and Children and Gender Equality and Finance.
1659, creating the Trabaho sa Oras ng Pagbangon program, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Labor and Employment, Civil Service, and Finance.
1660, an act fulfilling the emancipation of agrarian reform beneficiaries from the debt burden through the subrogation by the national government of agrarian reform beneficiaries under the voluntary land transfer and direct payment schemes and the assumption of their debts thereunder to appropriate funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Agriculture, Food, and Finance.
1661, an act fulfilling the emancipation of agrarian reform beneficiaries from the debt burden through the free award of agricultural lands under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Marcos.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Finance.
Committee reports, Committee Report number 18 by the Committee on Higher Technical and Vocational Education on House number 4635, introduced by Representative Adyong et al. An act extending the term of office of the President of the Adyong Memorial State College from 3 years to 4 years in accordance with RA 8292, otherwise known as the Higher Education Modernization Act of 1997, amending for the purpose RA 8651 as amended and appointing funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Escudero.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report number 19 by the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations on PS Resolution number 120, introduced by Senator Pimentel III, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged overpriced and outdated laptops procured by the DepEd through the Department of Budget Procurement Service, DBMPS, and PS Resolution number 134 by Senator Cayetano AP, directing the Senate Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations to conduct an inquiry on the procurement by the DepEd through the procurement service of the DBM of laptops for teachers for use in distance learning, recommending the approval of the committee report, sponsor Senator Tolentino.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to consider proposed Senate Resolution number 250, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution numbers 252, 283, 312, and 424, and for the Secretary to read the title of the measure. This is the resolution commending the outstanding women in the nation's service 2022 awardees.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, motion is approved. We ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Resolution honoring and commending the outstanding women in nation service towns 2022 awardees.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we recognize the distinguished gentleman from the great province of Aurora, our colleague Senator Sani Angara, to deliver his sponsorship speech. So moved, Mr. President.
Our distinguished colleague from the great province of Aurora, who wishes to make Baler the surfing capital of the Philippines, is recognized. Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, distinguished colleagues. Again, Happy New Year to all of us, and greetings to our birthday celebrants, Mr. President. Mr. President, we proudly join our colleagues standing today in this August chamber to recognize the 11 women chosen in the Search for the Outstanding Women in the Nation Service, or the Towns Awards. Women have long played an outsized and singularly vital role in our society, from the pre-colonial matriarchal days of the Babaylans to the various revolutions our people have waged against repression and injustice, up to today as the Philippines continues to be a world leader for gender equality and women empowerment. However, despite this long history, many Filipinas continue to face struggle. Their voices go unheard, their dignity diminished, and their wisdom and experience marginalized from the wider public narrative. There remain several ways that women can be further empowered and for their contributions to the betterment of our society to be more widely recognized. That is why in our early days as a legislator, back in the House of Representatives, we authored the Magna Carta for Women, or Republic Act 9710, which further enshrines the critical role women play in nation building, ensures the substantive equality between all genders, and establishes the broad legal framework that upholds and safeguards the rights of women. This is also why we speak today, to sing praises and admiration for our town's awardees. Kahanga-hanga po, Mr. President, ang mga awardees natin ngayon. Iba-iba man ang kanilang mga larangan at propesyon, lahat sila ay may malaking naiambag para sa ikabubuti at ikaunlad ng ating lipunan. Ang 2022 Towns Awardees ay sina Dr. Annie Rosa Almario ng Adarna House at Raya School para sa edukasyon at entrepreneurship. Si Rubilen Bingkay Amit na kilalang world-class billiards player para sa sports. Si Dr. Pia Bagamasbad na kasalukuyang direktor ng National Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology sa UP Diliman para sa medicine at public health. Si Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho na Director ng Health Promotions Bureau ng DOH para din sa Medicine at Public Health, si Dr. Erica Legara, Professor sa Asian Institute of Management or AIM, at co-author ng National Artificial Intelligence Strategy Roadmap para sa Data Science, si Keisha Alena Mayuga para sa kontribusyon sa transportasyon bilang isang local urban planner, active mobility advocate, lead convener ng Life Cycles PH, at isa sa mga nangunguna sa Move as One coalition na nagtulak para magkaroon ng nationwide bike lane system. Si Ana Patricia Non para sa community service sa kanyang pagtayo ng pinakaunang community pantry noong 2021 sa Teachers Village noong panahon ng pandemya. Si Ana Rosario Oposa, environmentalist, advocacy campaigner at co-founder ng Save the Philippine Seas movement para sa marine ecology conservation. Si Patricia Marie Pia Ranada ng Rappler for Investigative Journalism, si Georgina Romero para sa Women Empowerment through Information and Communications Technology, bilang founder ng Connected Women na isang social enterprise na nagtuturo ng mga digital skills at mga remote work competencies para sa mga kababaihan sa mga mahihirap at malalayong lugar. Si Dr. Aleta Iniguez para sa kontribusyon niya sa Marine Science bilang isa sa mga faculty ng UP Marine Science Institute, kung saan marami sa kanyang mga pagsasaliksik ay nagamit para tugunan o paghandaan ang mga extraordinary events tulad ng mga harmful algae blooms na nakakasira sa ecosystems ng ating mga dagat. Napakainam po, Mr. President, sa unang araw ng muling pagbukas ng ating sesyon nakapaglaan tayo ng kaunting oras para kilalanin ang mga babaeng karapat-dapat parangalan. Pahapyaw man lang po natin binanggit ang kanilang mga nagawa at tagumpay para sa ikabubuti ng ating bansa. Kaya sana sa ating munting talumpati, maudyok ang sambayanan na lalong kilalanin ang 11 babae na binanggit dito at alamin ang kani-kanilang mga kwento. Dahil silang lahat po ay mga ehemplo na dapat tularan. Sila ay mga patibay na kahit sino ay maaaring maging mitsa ng pagbabago. Na basta't may tamang paninindigan at umaapaw na sipag at tiyaga, posible ang anumang reforma at pagbabago na kritikal ang ambag ng kababaihan sa bawat aspeto ng lipunan na hindi balakid ang kasarian para makapagserbisyo at makatulong sa sambayanan. Sana hindi lang mauwi sa simpleng paghanga ang ating parangal sa Towns Awardees ngayong araw, sana tunay na magsilbing inspirasyon ng mga awardees sa ating lahat para umaksyon at gamitin ang kakayahan at talento para sa kabubuti at ikauunlad ng ating bansa. Ayon sa isang sinulat ng pinakaunang babae na Supreme Court Justice na si Justice Cecilia Muñoz Palma, woman was created for a nobler purpose than to simply admire and be admired. Kaya iwaksi na po natin ang anumang pagmamaliit sa kababaihan, palaganapin pa natin ang kaisipan na talagang napakalaki ang kanilang kontribusyon sa ating lipunan, sama-sama natin silang parangalan, ang 2022 Towns Awardees. Maraming pong salamat, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Senator Bong Revilla would like to insert just for the record speech. I move that it be inserted, Mr. President.
Yes, the motion is noted.
No, next to sponsor the measure is the distinguished lady from the city of Makati, the next mayor of Makati, Senator Nancy Binay. I move that she be recognized.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Makati, Senator Nancy Binay is recognized.
Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, today I rise to sponsor Senate Resolution number 250, honoring and commending the 2022 Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service Awardees or Towns. Ang mga kababaihang kasama natin ngayon ay nagbigay ng mahalagang kontribusyon sa kanilang mga napiling adhikain. Nararapat lamang na sila ay ating parangalan at ipagmalaki dahil na rin sa kanilang paglilingkod sa ating bayan at sa ating mga kapwa Pilipino. They are an inspiration, especially to fellow women and young girls, showing us that it is possible to excel despite adversities and hardships. Nariyan si Teacher Annie Rosa Almario, isang children's books publisher at educator. Isa sa kanyang mga advokasya ay siguruhin na bukod sa literary merit ng mga akda, ay mailalathala ang mga kwento at napapanahong issue na dapat malaman ng mga bata. The progressive school teacher Annie Rosa, co-founded, is also known for instilling a sense of country and cultural pride to students. Nariyan din si Rubilin Amit, who is one of the best 10 ball players in the world, regardless of gender, a former world champion and a 10-time Southeast Asian Games gold medalist. Ipinakita ni Rubilin na kaya nating mga kababaihan na makipagsabayan kahit kanino sa larangan ng bilyar. Dr. Pia Baga Masbad, meanwhile, is a key player in the country's pandemic response. Dr. Pia helped increase our country's testing capacity and also trained medical technologists across the country on the proper use of RT-PCR tests. Si ASEC Beverly Lorraine Ho ng Department of Health ay isa sa mga nanguna sa ating BIDA and RES bakuna informational campaigns noong kasagsagan ng pandemya. With this recognition of Dr. Beverly, we hope to encourage women to get into public health as a legitimate field apart from frontline clinical services. We also have Dr. Erica Legara, a physicist and an advocate of data-driven culture, a recipient of the Outstanding Young Scientist Award by the National Academy of Science and Technology. Dr. Erica pushes for data-driven science in policymaking to help future-proof our country. Another Pinay pride is Keisha Elena Mayuga, an urban planner and urban transport specialist who advocates for better public transport and safer bike infrastructure in Metro Manila. Keisha is also the founder of Life Cycles PH, which helped in providing bikes to frontliners at the height of the transportation problem during the pandemic. Si Ana Rosario Oposa naman ay kinilala dahil sa kanyang mga kontribusyon pagdating sa marine ecology conservation. Binuo ni Ana ang Save Philippine Seas movement na tumutulong sa pangangalaga ng marine biodiversity sa ating bansa. Nariyan din si Dr. Aleta Iniguez mula sa University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute na kinilala sa kanyang kontribusyon pagdating sa marine science. Dr. Aleta helped create tools to promote sustainable fisheries and made it accessible to small-scale fishers. She is also leading projects on developing early warning systems for harmful algal blooms in the country. Ms. Georgina Romero is the co-founder of a tech startup which provides online skills development and remote work opportunities for women. So far, Georgina's company has trained 40,000 women on entrepreneurship skills for the digital economy and is set to train 1,000 more women on skills in the artificial intelligence industry. Si Ana Patricia Non naman ay kinilala sa pag-organisa ng mga community pantry na nakapagbigay ng inspirasyon sa mga Pilipino na magtulungan noong kasagsagan ng lockdown sa bansa. From one community pantry in Maginhawa, Patreng moved our kababayans to give and help in different ways with at least 6,700 community pantries sprouting nationwide within weeks. And last but definitely not the least is Ms. Patricia Marie Ranyada, a journalist who covers politics and the environment. Tricia has been recognized for in-depth and investigative pieces and is an inspiration not only to women but to all media practitioners to continue to pursue the truth in their reporting. Each of these women are leaders in their own right, and it only shows that in every sphere of influence, a woman's voice is essential. Huwag sana kayong magsawa sa inyong serbisyo sa kapwa at sa bayan, at naway patuloy kayong magbigay lakas, lalong-lalo na sa mga kababaihan na hindi hadlang ang anumang balakid para makamtan ang minimithing hangarin. Mr. President, it is with utmost pride that I present to you the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service 2022 awardees. Maraming salamat sa inyong mga kontribusyon sa lipunan at mabuhay ang mga kababaihan.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, next to co-sponsored the measure is a Town's awardee herself, our distinguished Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda. I move that she be recognized.
Our distinguished Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to associate myself with the sponsors of the measure, and as one of the authors of the resolutions, I would like to thank our Majority Leader for referring it in due time so that it is made part of this sponsorship. Ako po ay nagbibigay pugay sa lahat ng kababaihan na siyang binibigyan ng parangal ngayong araw na to ng Senado. Nakikiisa po ako sa inyo, hindi ko nababanggitin isa-isa. Iba sa kanila ay kilala natin, iba nababasa natin ang kanilang trabaho. Ang nais ko ay makapagtrabaho kasama kayo sa iba't ibang aspeto ng ating buhay sa ating bansa. So once again, having been at towns myself, maybe I should not name the year because it is much more than 20 years ago. It was in the early 90s. Perhaps some of the women being mentioned today or being awarded by the towns were not yet born at the time. But I am told it was... Okay, so it was 1995. But the year does not matter. What matters is the work that you do, and perhaps we could get together and see more how you could help us in terms of policy and how to improve the state of affairs in the country. So once again, congratulations to the 2022 Towns awardees from an old-timer in Towns. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senate President Pro Temp Lauren Legarda. Next to co-sponsor the measure, Mr. President, is our distinguished Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros. I move
Our
that she be
distinguished
recognized.
Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros, is recognized.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Sa kagandahang loob ng sponsor at co-sponsor ng mga resolusyong ito, I rise to co-sponsor proposed Senate Resolutions 250, 252, 283, and 312. Babanggitin ko ang ilan sa mga pinararangalan nating mga kabaro ko, Mr. President, before going to some general comments. Nais ko pong ipagdiwang ang paggawad ng Towns Awards at pagpaparangal ng Senado sa kanila, lalong-lalo na po kina Ani Rosa Almario na naging guro at tagapangasiwa ng paaralan ng aking bunsong anak. Si Ani na mula sa mga angkan ng mga tanyag sa larangan ng sining, ng sociology, at dahil sa kanyang life's work sa edukasyon din at sa pagpapalimbag ng mga aklat para sa ating mga bata at kabataang Filipino. Si Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho, na kinikilala po, Mr. President, lalo na ng mga universal healthcare advocates tulad ni Sen. J.V. Ejercito at ng marami pang health reform advocates bilang isa sa pinakamahusay at may integridad na opisyal natin sa Department of Health. Si Ana Patricia Non, na isang nag-inspire sa ating buong bansa sa pinakamadidilim na taon ng pandemya na pakainin ang isa't isa, pakainin ang mga nagugutom at bigyang daan ang lahat, pati po yung mga nagugutom at mahihirap na tulungan din ang kapwa Pilipino. Si Ana Patricia na sa kabila ng mga hamon na hinarap, pati ang infamous na red tagging, maging laban sa inosente at magiting na gawain ng mga community pantries. Si Ana Rosario Oposa na nagpapatuloy sa dakilang tradisyon ng kanilang angkan ng pag-alaga at giving back sa ating ekolohiya kay Inang Kalikasan. At si Patricia Maria Ranada na kasama po ni Pia Ranada, ipinagdiriwang ko ang kamakailan lamang tagumpay ng Rappler, kasama po ni Maria Reza na na-acquit po sa mga inihain sa kanilang mga tax evasion charges. At kasama po ni Pia Ranada, Mr. President, ay patuloy akong umaasa humaharap ang ating bansa sa mas mahabang panahon ng malaya at defiant na pamamahayag. This I know for sure, Mr. President. When we tell stories of strong women, we celebrate the strength of all women. We celebrate all that women can do and all that women can be. I honor these fellow women who have stood strong in the face of tenacious attacks and rank misogyny. Women journalists, women in the medical and science and technology professions who have been our light during the dark times of our pandemic. Women environmentalists, women entrepreneurs, women community leaders. They show us that we do not need to ask to make space at the table for women. They have claimed these spaces and they claim them for all women. Kaya Mr. President, kasama po ng ating sponsor at co-sponsor, kasama na ating buong institusyon ng Senado, ako po ay nagpapasalamat at nagpupugay sa ating ngayong taon, 2022, na mga ginawaran ng Towns Awards. Salamat kaayo, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, next to co-sponsor the measure is the distinguished lady from the city of Taguig and Pateros, our good senator, Senator Pia Cayetano. I
Our
move that she
distinguished
be recognized.
colleague from the city of Taguig and Pateros is recognized, Senator Pia Cayetano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a short intervention. Mr. President, I join my colleagues in honoring the women present with us today and those who are not here, the Towns awardees. Mr. President, what I'd like to emphasize is this. When we showcase women who have achieved it is very common that we say that little girls will see them and know what their full potential can be. And this is the role that they now have because they're paving the way for young girls. But I had the chance of speaking to two of our jiu-jitsu international champions over here, and I told them, aside from inspiring the little girls, they are also inspiring the future of boys who mingle with these little girls. These boys will understand that women equally hold the fort. Women are equal partners. In fact, in many instances, and many of my dear colleagues here will admit that their partner is the better partner, doing the household, running the household, taking care of the children, and also working in whatever other career they have. That is the truth, Your Honor. And until men, and for that matter, young boys, are able to see that through women like this who pave the way, we will continue to have the struggle of inequality. And for that reason, I honor all of you because you show the world, both boys and girls, what women can achieve. Congratulations, and thank you, dear colleagues, for taking the time to honor these women.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, also would like to note that the sponsorship speech of Senator Lapid, Senator Jinggoy, and this representation be also inserted into the records.
We take
Thank
note
you.
of the manifestation.
Mr. President, at this juncture, move that we recognize the distinguished gentleman from Bicol, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, for his intervention and manifestation. So move, Mr. President.
The distinguished gentleman from Bicol and Republic of the Philippines, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, is recognized. Kapatid.
Maraming salamat po, aming mahal na Ginoong Pangulo at sa ating pong pinunong mayorya. Hindi ko lang po kayang mapigilan ang aking sarili na hindi po makapagbigay ng suporta at sumali po sa napakagandang mungkahi na ito. At sapagkat alam niyo po, ngayong araw na ito, mahal na Pangulo, ang atin pong sineselebrate din ang kauna-unahang pagtatag ng unang Republika ng Pilipinas sa Malolos. At alam niyo po ay hindi po mangyayari ang unang Republika kung hindi dahil sa sakripisyo ng mga kababaihan. Nandiyan po ang ating Melchora Aquino, nandiyan po sila Gabriela Silang, sila Trinidad Rizal, nandiyan po si Gregorio de Jesus. Tunay po na naukit ang ating Republika dahil po sa mga kababaihan. At yan po ay napapatunayan hanggang sa ngayon dahil ngayon po ang pinakamatatapang dito sa Senado ay mga kababaihan pa rin. At talagang tayo po'y natatahimik kapag tumaas na po ang kanilang mga boses. At katunayan, ang aking pong pagtayo dito ay bilang una, pagpupugay po sa ating mga awardee. Mabuhay ang kababaihan. Opo, at ako po ay inyo talagang taga-suporta mula po sa aking lalong-lalo na sa puso at higit sa lahat sa kaisipan at kaluluwa. Kaya ako po ay isinasali ko na po ang sarili ko po sa mungkahi na ito. Maraming salamat po, aming mahal na Pangulo at pinunong mayorya. Mabuhay ang kababaihan.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Mr. President, I will also take this opportunity as our good colleague mentioned about today's special occasion, Mr. President, which is the Araw ng Republikang Pilipino, Republic Act number 11014, which was passed into law in 2017, declaring today, January 23 of every year, as the first Philippine Republic Day, which shall be a special working holiday in the entire province. Ginoong Pangulo, atin din pong giniginita yung 124th na araw ng Republikang Pilipino, ang unang Republika ng Pilipinas na idinaos po at itinatag doon sa dakilang bayan ng Malolos, Bulacan noong January 23, 1899. Ito po yung naging dahilan kung bakit tinawag ang Pilipinas na duyan ng demokrasya sa silangan dahil tayo po ang unang republika sa Asia. So, Mr. President, the Malolos Republic was the culmination of the Philippine Revolution, which began with the Katipunan and led to the creation of the first constitution and republican government of Asia. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. At this juncture, I move that we recognize, last but not the least, the distinguished gentleman from San Juan, our Deputy Majority Leader, no other than Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Our distinguished gentleman and colleague from the city of San Juan, Senator J.V. Ercito, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Likewise, I'd like to associate myself with the resolutions filed, commending the outstanding women in the nation service or towns for 2022. Mr. President, I also observed that a lot of doctors are towns awardees this year, and I'd like to commend all of them for their service to the nation, but in particular, personally, Mr. President, I worked with Assistant Secretary Dr. Beverly Ho in the passage of the Universal Healthcare Act, and she was with us every step of the way. And also for the record that she is a TOYM awardee for 2022 and likewise a Towns awardee. So she was recognized for these two prestigious awards all in 1 year. So I'd like to thank her again. And likewise, I'd like to also remind, being a TOYM awardee myself, together with some of our colleagues in the Senate like Senator Loren, Senator Sani Angara, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Cheese, Senator Riza, a lot of our TOYM awardees. It's not only that we are being awarded because we are good public servants, good mayors, good media practitioners, good doctors. We have to be extraordinary. So my challenge to all our towns awardees, continue serving the nation and continue to make a difference and continue to be extraordinary. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, this is last but not the least. The distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, would also like to co-sponsor the measure. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
To the distinguished eligible Bachelor of the
The
Senate,
hottest.
Senator Sherwin
Thank you.
Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed peers in the Senate, good afternoon. I'm one with my colleagues in commending our laureates of Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service 2022 for recognizing the vital role they play as the assets of our country in the never-ending task of nation building. These exceptional women undeniably carried out their extraordinary competence, dedication to serving our country, and desire to contribute to the development of our nation. Through the inspiring narratives and achievements that they have attained, I have faith that the next generation of Filipinas will follow in their footsteps. May I request that I will be likewise made as co-author and co-sponsor of this resolution. Mabuhay ang mga kababaihan, mabuhay ang Towns Awardee 2022.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Gatchalian. Mr. President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that all members of the Senate be made co-authors of this resolution. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion is approved. And before we act on the motion to approve the resolution, I'd like to also make special mention on Attorney Oposa's daughter, Ana Oposa, was here today. We worked well together in my first term in the Save Our Seas projects. I was part of the Concerned Divers, CDP Concerned Divers of the Philippines, and we've been working ever since to save the oceans and our seas.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, and she was a TOYM awardee also last year. And to all the winners
Yes.
of today's, rather the Towns awardees are all well-deserving.
Well deserved.
We congratulate them all.
Thank
so
you.
you can make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. No other member wishes to interpolate or propose any amendments to the measure. I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 250, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolutions number 252, 283, 312, subject to style, Mr. President. 424, Mr. President,
Yes.
subject to style.
There being no objection, proposed Senate Resolution number 250, taking in consideration Senate Resolution number 252, 283, 312, and all the other resolutions thereafter is approved, subject to style.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to ask our awardees to come here in front at the podium, Mr. President,
Receive
for
their
a short
resolution.
picture taking. But also, Mr. President, we'd also like to honor, because we have with us today in the gallery our jiu-jitsu athletes, Kimberly Ann Custodio and Meggie Ochoa. We already adopted a resolution congratulating our beloved athletes and the rest of the Philippine Jiu-Jitsu team last December 14, 2022. On that note, Mr. President, may I also move for a minute suspension to present to Kimberly Ann Custodio and Meggie Ochoa our adopted resolution after the presentation.
Both, by the way, are women,
Yes, Mr. President.
women champions.
Talagang kakaiba ang ating mga kababaihan.
And our football
Saludo
team
tayo.
also, our football team,
Yes, Mr.
which will be
President.
going to the New Zealand, for the World Cup in New Zealand this coming summer. It's the first time we've ever had a
Representative.
a team, a soccer team or football team play in the World Cup event. So we are being dominated this year, this coming years by our women champions. So
Move for the previous question, Mr.
yes,
President.
to allow our colleagues to have a photo opportunity with the guests and awardees, I move for a 1-minute suspension.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize our distinguished Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Ligarda, to deliver her speech. So move, Mr. President.
Our Senate President pro tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, the Philippines is now the country with the highest disaster risk in the world. The World Risk Report 2022 assessed the level of exposure, susceptibility, and the lack of coping and adaptive capacities of countries from disaster and climate risks and hazards, and we came out as the most vulnerable. This is no longer new to us. Year after year, we have ranked high among the countries most at risk of disasters and climate change, a reminder of both our natural situation and our vulnerability. Mulat na tayo sa epekto nito sa Pilipino at sa ating ekonomiya. Napawalang saysay ang dekada-dekada nating aksyon upang maitaas ang antas ng buhay ng bawat pamilyang Pilipino at mapalago ang ekonomiya dahil sa matitinding bagyo, tagtuyot, pagbaha, pagguho ng lupa at iba pang mga delubyot sakuna. Mula nitong Desyembre, may shear line na nagdulot ng baha sa Mindanao at hindi pa nga nakakabangon ay tuloy pa rin ang baha doon. Taon-taon, 506.1 billion pesos ang nawawala sa atin dahil sa mga sakunang ito. Katumbas na yan ang pinagsamang budget ng DOH at ng DSWD para sa 2023. Kung gaano man kalaking halaga ang matitipid kung tayo ay mas handa, ay maari na sanang mailaan sa iba pang nating pangangailangan. Unfortunately, climate events are not single unrelated disasters. With each devastation, our vulnerabilities multiply, reverberating through all aspects of human life and biodiversity and bringing us closer to multiple ecosystem points of no return. These effects have a feedback loop that makes succeeding effects much worse. Whenever we assess damage to crops and infrastructure from disasters, we fail to take into account the damage to ecosystems. Ravaged forests and coral reefs have much reduced capacity to provide services such as water retention, flood prevention, cultivar sources, air filtration, carbon sequestration. Due to sea level rise each passing day, we risk losing our coastlines and entire islands. We will lose entire cities and townships along the coast if we do not succeed, resulting in chaos. This fact needs to be integral to all our planning. Way back in 2009, we passed the Climate Change Act. We followed it up in 2012 with the People's Survival Fund. Despite their best efforts reducing requirements and assisting in proposal development, the Climate Change Commission has only been able to approve 1/3 of the initial allocation from 11 years ago. This fund should not be a wasted opportunity. Now, on our nationally determined contributions, our country needs climate finance to build our defenses and safeguard every Filipino from climate impacts. But we also need climate finance to transition our economy and society towards low carbon development and growth, the kind that would mitigate global warming and the intensity of climate change. Thus, in 2021, the Philippines submitted our nationally determined contribution, or NDC, conveying a 75% greenhouse gas emissions reduction and avoidance target by 2030 for agriculture, waste, industry, transport, and the energy sectors. Of this target, almost 3% is unconditional, or it will be undertaken using domestic resources. The rest is conditional, or will be implemented
through support for technology development and transfer, capacity building, and climate finance by developed countries as mandated by the Paris Agreement. We have an ambitious NDC despite our negligible contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions. But we need to look at these commitments as investment plans, a massive opportunity for us to have the long view, to modernize our sectors and transform our society past the climate crisis. Consider how we could make our industries and households run on cheap and renewable energy and not on imported fossil fuels, or how we could reinvent our car-centric transport sector to deploy more inclusive, low-carbon public vehicles and mass transport systems, or how agriculture can thrive on natural fertility and microbiomes not reliant on imports. Think of a life without disposables and planned obsolescence, and of reversing the pollution they bring to us and the living environment. Think of the sustainable practices and products that could become economic opportunities in a changed world. Change is inevitable, and we have to use the momentum of how fast things are changing to ride that tide and chart the direction of our nation's future. Now, on COP27, just late last year, world leaders and country delegations spent 2 weeks in November discussing the implementation of the 2015 Paris Agreement to keep global warming from breaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels and providing support to vulnerable developing countries such as ours. It was already the 27th COP, Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC. While certain decisions or non-decisions are still lacking, the COP nevertheless made history as countries finally agreed to operationalize funding arrangements to address loss and damage. Finally, it took 30 years for the parties to the UNFCCC to reach this decision. But as they say, better late than never. We can now hope that the details are fleshed out and our situation as most vulnerable will open the tap for funds to come in to help us recover and shift to climate resilient development. This loss and damage fund cannot bring back what we have lost in terms of lives, livelihoods, assets, opportunities, but just like the post-war reparation, this will help get us on an appropriate development track. Loss and damage are now enshrined as a third pillar of climate action, alongside mitigation and adaptation. I remember standing here 20 years ago, we would talk about mitigation, adaptation, now loss and damage. At COP27, the Philippines was also able to advance national interests by progressively phasing out subsidies for fossil fuels, promoting renewable energies, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and non-market approaches to climate action. Our country also recently joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. The commitment of the Department of Foreign Affairs, finally, and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, finally, in joining the HAC has set an aspiration of protecting at least 30% of the world's land and ocean through increased public and private financing to ensure long-term management and local governance and clear implementation mechanisms to nature so we can recover the ecosystems by the year 2030. This target was adopted by the Conference of Parties, another COP, in another critical convention, the Convention on Biodiversity, or CBD. In COP 15 of the CBD, state parties also agreed on major shifts in societies necessary to halt mass extinction. Mas pinapag-usapang ang COP ng UNFCCC, kasing halaga po ang COP ng CBD. This is consistent with the United Nations declaration of this decade as one for ecological restoration. Lahat nakatugma sa dekadang ito po. Not surprisingly, 2030 is a target for reaching as well our Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm glad that our colleague is on the floor, chair of the SDG committee. We have very little time. I urge this august chamber to think about these goals in every piece of legislation that we craft as we transition to survive and thrive past the climate crisis. On this note, I wish to thank Philippine delegations for both COPs, headed by Environment Secretary Loizaga, representatives from the DNR, CCC, DA, DFA, DOE, NEDA, civil society for relentlessly pushing for better targets and making developed nations deliver on their commitments. But while I commend the delegations, I also urge our leaders to make good on their climate pronouncements. We are way past the point when we can pay lip service to mitigation and adaptation and still avoid blame. We all carry the burden of a just energy transition, but we in government need not just to pave the way, but to show the way. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, our work in this battle against climate change, considered the greatest existential threat to all of humanity, continues. It is inextricably linked to the biodiversity crisis. There is no time to lose. And I want all of us, as legislators who pass laws, who conduct oversight, and allocate the budget, to embrace the critical role we play in this global climate emergency. Our work in the Senate and this 19th Congress will be a testament to our commitment to improving the lives of every Filipino and safeguarding our nation's future in light of the growing challenges amid this climate crisis. Buhay, kabuhayan, at kinabukasan ang nakataya. Hindi na pwedeng hindi kaya dahil kailangan. Mr. President, colleagues, the people have placed their utmost trust and confidence in all of us. Let us not waste this opportunity to do good, to do what is right, and in all our endeavors, imagine a different future past this twin crisis of climate and biodiversity collapse. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lorne Legarda. I'd like to recognize Senator Pia Cayetano.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the sponsor, our Senate President Pro Temp, I would like to just make a few statements and maybe ask one or two questions.
Yes, of course, Mr. President, I would be happy to answer all questions.
Thank you. I'd like to commend our Senate President Pro Temp for once again bringing to light this situation brought about by climate change. And to go straight to the point, I'd like to make: how much does Her Honor believe in her expert opinion? And I have to say that she would be the expert here, Your Honor. She mentioned, let me give some background to my question first. She mentioned that there is 506.1 billion loss from climate change hazards, basically as a result of climate change. No, that's correct. Now I'm quoting from Her Honor's presentation, 506.1 billion. She also mentioned that the Philippines is now ranked the highest in the ranking of disaster risk based on the latest report. So my question is, for us to be ranked at the highest, no, to achieve that position, and then we have an amount here that we can try to visualize, no? 506 billion. Paano nangyari to? Is it, kasi Your Honor, Mr. Senate President, our colleague has in fairness been bringing this to our attention, been putting funding for this, to the point na kalabugin, let me use that word, yung members ng Climate Change Commission na wala dito nung budget hearing, So it's not for lack of her attention and also the inspiration that she gave the others na buo nga yung ating Climate Change Commission. Your Honor, that would be your law. If I'm not, yes, that would be your law. And what year?
It was 2009,
Okay,
but I filed it
earlier.
every year
So-
until it was
So I'm
passed.
just laying the basis that hindi naman tayo nagkulang sa Senate under her honor's leadership, no, to bring this to the attention of the whole country, to put funding into it. So when we end up getting ranked number 1 in this highest, the country, the Philippines is at the highest disaster risk. How much of that is brought about by our own doings? Kumbaga yung pagkukulang natin, and how much of that is sa hindi naman natin kasalanan, di ba? There are islands na hindi naman nila pinili, pero sila yung unang lulubog, di ba? May ganun eh. So ano dun yung hindi naman natin kasalanan, nagkataon lang na we are in the circle of the typhoon zone, you know? Ano doon yung kasi yun, baka wala na tayong magagawa unless bumili tayo ng ibang isla sa ibang parte ng mundo.
Okay.
So let's focus on
Thank you.
what can we do? Ano dun yung pinagkulang natin na magagawa pa natin?
Thank you very much for that very important question. First of all, Mr. President, we are only a 1/3 of 1% emitter in the world.
Yes,
But
yes.
yes, we are number 1 in vulnerability and world disaster risk.
Can you repeat
Now,
that? 1/3
We
of
are
1%.
a 0.3. So we are a 1/3 of 1% global greenhouse gas emitter in the world. Ang Pilipinas po ay isa sa pinaka mababa, ay 1/3 lang po ng 1% ng pagbuga ng greenhouse gas na sanhi po nitong lahat.
Okay.
Pero tayo po ay nararangko dati po ng top 3, top 5. Ngayon po, number 1 na po tayo sa world disaster risk. At sa bawat delubyo, sa bawat ulan, sa bawat isa sa 20 o higit pa po na bagyo, ay ito
Kasama
po
tayo dun.
kumakain sa GDP po natin. Binanggit
Yes,
ko po
yes.
yung ating losses nga ay higit na sa 500 billion at ayon po sa Department of Finance ay 48.9 billion or 0.33% of GDP is lost yearly during the same period due to risks due to climate change. In short, tayo po ay vulnerable. So, tama kayo, hindi nating kasalanan, pero kaya nga ang ating advokasya ay hindi lang po mitigation, yung pagpabawas ng pagbubuga ng greenhouse gas emissions, kundi mas mahalaga siguro o kasing halaga ay adaptation. At tayo natutuwa na pinansin na po yung advokasya pa natin na loss and damage na yung mga bansang may kadahilanan ng mga
Ng greenhouse
nangyayari
gas
nito
emissions na
ay
to,
ngayon
sila ang
ay
magbayad.
bibigay na ng
Tama.
pondo. Pero yung adaptation, napakahalaga. Ano ba ho yung adaptation? Yung
Ma'am,
ating
before you go
pag-aakma.
into that, kasi
Yes.
kung ako, gusto ko yan maintindihan na maayos, lalo na ho yung nakikinig sa atin. So bago ka pumunta dun sa adaptation, siguro iliwanag nyo pa yung loss and damage. Ang ibig sabihin nun sa pagkakaintindi ko, pero kayo na ho ang magpaliwanag, yung sabi nyo nga, okay, less than 1% ang kagagawan natin. And yet tayo ang number 1 na nakakaramdam ng effects ng climate change. So yung mga responsible for this, and we know that these are a lot of the developed countries, yung very industrialized countries, sila ngayon ang gusto nating magbayad, di ba?
Yes.
Ng damages. So pwede iliwanag niyo yung concept na yun. Kasi, and then you go to the part na gusto niyong sabihin na, syempre may responsibility tayo. Bansa natin to, gumigising tayo araw-araw in our country, we have to adapt for our own preservation. But dun muna tayo dun sa, so what can we expect of them and what can we do as citizens, what can we do as legislators to be sure na yung may responsibility naman na yun, bayaran naman nila, pondohan naman nila, yung in effect tayo we carry that burden of their actions that damage the world, and tayo in the Philippines carry that burden.
Kaya nga po tayo ay nagratipika ng Paris Agreement. Nakasaad po sa isa sa mga probisyon ng Paris Agreement yung pagbibigay ng pondo ng ating mga industrialized nations para sa Green Climate Fund. masalimuot lamang ang proseso ng pag-access ng pondo sa GCF. Pero nung ako po'y naging member ng board na GCF a few years ago, ngayon ito na yata si Commissioner Herrera ang nakaupo sa board dahil hindi ko na po kayang magbiyahe sa Korea tuwing meeting po nun, ay ang pag-asa po, akma na rin sa Modernization Act, ay naging benepisyaryo ng Green Climate Fund. Pero ilang taon ang proseso. So in short, nagbibigay naman po, ayon sa Paris Agreement, magkano? 100 billion annual? $100 billion ang pananagutan na dapat ibigay ng mga industrialized nations na siyang naging sanhi ng kaganapan ng pagbabago ng klima, the climate crisis, ay sila ang nagbibigay. Hindi pa na Englishin ko. They have not reached the $100 billion. But the Philippines, to be fair, has accessed it through pag-asa.
Pakonti-konti though, hindi 100 billion, tama ba? Pakonti-konti
Yes,
na access natin.
We've only accessed it once, no? Just pag-asa. 5 projects, but it's not yet in effect.
So,
Kasi
pero
may-
more or less magkano
may
po yun,
counter.
yung na-access natin?
How much was the pag-asa? 10 million US dollars. So 10 million US dollars, pero maliit lang po ito eh. Kaya nga po, ito, how many projects were approved? 209 projects were approved totaling 42.4 billion US dollars, in which 11.3 billion US dollars were financed by GCF through grants, equities, among others. Pero ito pong 209 ay marami. Ang Pilipinas po ay maraming bansa. Itong 6 ay sa Pilipinas. At kasama dito yung multi-hazard impact-based forecasting and early warning system. I want to say this, Mr. President, na hindi lang dapat tayo umasa sa isang grant gaya ng GCF. Kaya nga po ang ating advokasya, sana it's a whole-of-nation approach, and I would like to say a whole-of-GAA approach. Sana po ang bawat galaw natin, ang bawat budget po natin, hindi lamang isang maliit na ahensya ng gobyerno. Dapat ang DA, pag umakto sila, na parang tayo talaga nasa ICU, nasa climate emergency. Ang DNR, ang kanilang pag-manage ng mga PAMBI ng mga protected areas natin, na parang tayo nasa emergency room, nasa ICU, nasa climate crisis. Ang ating DepEd, kailangan yung environmental education awareness na kayo rin po ang nag-author nyon, ay parang nasa emergency, pinupukpok talaga yan ang mga isyong yan. So, lahat po ng ahensya ng gobyerno, hindi lang isang ahensya o dalawa, ang climate, iba, kami, business as usual. Kaya nga po, ay sana, there should be a whole of government, whole of nation approach in addressing the climate crisis. So, our accessing one fund based on the climate accord, which is the Paris Agreement, is just one facility that is made available to the Philippines. But this few grants will not change the scenario, will not change the sheer line.
Yes.
Adaptation. Dapat sa bawat lokal na pamahalaan, yung 1,600 LGUs and 42,000 barangays, dibdibin at talagang isapuso ang pag-aaral, paggagamit ng mga early warning systems, ang paglilikas ng tao, ang paggagamit ng mapping para po hindi magtayo ng mga DepEd schools o ng evacuation center sa kung saan pala guguho ang bundok. So, I hope that all of this, whether you are DNR or DA or DepEd or the OTR, in everything we do, ay kailangan isaalang-alang po ang epekto ng ating ginagawa sa krisis ng klima na nangyayari.
Mr. President, I cannot find the right words to express my sincere gratitude to her honor for how she summarized this. Basically, she used the phrase whole of nation approach. I hold here in my hand just a copy of the Sustainable Development Goals, no? I always have this in my drawer because just like her honor said, unless in everything we do, unless the government agencies in every project that they undertake can see the bigger picture and work together, we will always fall short of this goal. Because wala nga tayong magagawa no? To a certain extent, yan na yun. Dinatnan na natin, pinanganak na tayo na nandito tayo sa sitwasyon natin. And let me elaborate, and I'd love to hear Her Honor's comment if she agrees with me. So when I look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I will use similar examples that Her Honor gave, binanggit niya health. So alam naman po ng lahat ng colleague natin na isa sa pinaglalaban ko yan, marami tayong kasama na nagsusupport dyan, si Senator Bongo, our presiding officer, Senator J.V. Ejercito, of course, Her Honor. I'll talk about my passion for recognizing the damage that tobacco and even e-cigarettes and vapes will do to the youth. So, when we neglect to see that this is one component, mauubos yung pondo ng pa-raise funds pa tayo, pa-syntax law pa tayo. Pero naman, in the other hand, with our other hand, we are allowing the proliferation of products that will be harmful to the health of the youth. We are not putting enough safeguards. Tinanggal natin sa kamay ng FDA. Then, hindi natin binibigay ang lahat ng pwede natin ibigay to strengthen the health of the Filipinos. Pagdating naman sa education, and baka nakikinig yung colleague na well, I'm sure nakikinig mga kasamahan natin na nasa lounge, I love you, Senator Bato, but I am against the ROTC bill. So we talk about education in my humble view, pag binuhos natin yung energy for every single Filipino youth to understand the Sustainable Development Goals, if they live in the mountains, if they live by the river, bahala silang alagaan yon. Instead of marching, instead of making a mandatory ROTC law, for me, yan yung future natin. Yan yung future na kailangan natin to be prepared for. Because in as much as I'm all for the safety of our country, na syempre ayoko naman ma-invade tayo, either an alien species or another neighboring country. But ang ikamamatay siguro po natin, Your Honor, and this is where I will end my intervention, baka ang ikamamatay natin is lack of clean water. Lack of air that we can breathe na hindi naman ikamamatay ng mga senior citizens natin. Lack of sustainable, nutritious food. Yan malamang ang ikamamatay natin. And that is why I agree with Her Honor. And if she can just give a quick response to this statement that I made, I'm thankful for the opportunity to ask some questions and share my insights.
Thank you so much. In answer to your question about loss and damage, simply put, loss and damage, Mr. President, are the consequences of climate change beyond adaptation. This could be economic or non-economic. Ito po yung mga, kung hindi na iba yung mitigation, yung pagbabawas, iba yung pag-a-adapt, ibig sabihin, inaakma natin buhay. Ang loss and damage, ito po yung mga responsibilidad ng mga bansang nagsanhi lahat ito. Itong shear line na binanggit po natin, example po, itong shear line na nagaganap sa Mindanao. Sa DA pa lang, may 315 million na losses at higit sa 10,100 ang ating mga magsasaka. Sa infra, 262 million na ang mga naapektuhan dito at 52 ang namatay. Wala pa silang report sa ecosystems na damage. Tama po kayo, yung Sustainable Development Goals, if we take it seriously and take it to heart, alam niyo po, nung chairman ako ng finance, you were congressman, I think at the time,
Yes.
I placed it in the overarching provisions in the GAA that our whole GAA must be aligned with the SDGs.
Yes.
What year was that? I think for 2 or 3
Mga
years.
2016, 2017, that
yes.
was in the House, and we continue it here. Thank you
Very
for that,
good.
Your Honor.
Yes, I'm so glad. So, you're correct. Kung seryosohin natin, hindi lamang sa DENR or Climate Change Commission. Tama kayo, sa health, sa edukasyon, sa lahat ng ahensya ang gobyerno, ay siguro ay maaagapan natin ang krisis ng klima, pag-akma ang ating pamumuhay at pagbibigay ng budget sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno alinsunod sa Sustainable Development Goals. Kaya maganda sigurong gawin ng ating sekretariat, may mungkahi po ako, sa bawat SDG, ilagay natin ang epekto sa climate crisis. I-marry natin bawat SDG. Let's say, the climate crisis sa health. O, itong SDG 1, SDG 2, yung epekto nito
at anong solusyon or anong batas ang existing na sa Pilipinas, anong programa ng gobyerno ang nag-address. I'll say it in English, perhaps it's faster. So we will align the SDGs with the aspects of the climate crisis, taking into consideration all existing laws or proposed legislation and programs of government which are already addressing the specific SDG which is not complied with because of the climate crisis. If there is lacking legislation or policy or funding that is missing, then we can address it. So we can have a matrix of the SDG vis-a-vis climate crisis, vis-a-vis policy, legislation, and budgeting.
I agree wholeheartedly, but if I may just add, what I realized in the last few years also, in addition to what Her Honor has said, is that we review our laws and even the bills that are still pending to ensure that they are aligned. Because sadly, Your Honor, there are bills that are pending, there are laws that we have passed that may have, definitely, obviously may purpose yun, ano? May purpose po yun. Pero it is possible na hindi sustainable yung plano na yon, Your Honor. So again, babanggitin ko yung favorite example ko, ang e-cigs and vapes. Sabi daw, alternative to smoking. And yet, we get it from the experts, there is not sufficient evidence to say that that is a proper alternative. So stop promoting it, especially with the youth, dahil kung hindi naman safe, edi may bagong addiction na naman tayo, di ba? So yun naman yung point ko, Your Honor, na it is even more difficult to be able to look at the laws we've passed and say, not so aligned. What can we do to amend this so that we are more aligned? Because otherwise, Your Honor will agree that we are siphoning funding that could be going to saving lives and putting it in places where it is not really, sometimes not needed at all, or not efficient use of our funds. So I agree, dadagdagan ko pa nga no, na parang, so on my part, Your Honor, I can commit to our colleagues that I try to look at every bill that we are discussing through the lens of sustainability. Para naman may contribution tayo to sustainability. Kasi nga baka may particular goal na hinahabol, pero hindi siya sustainable. I'll give you an example, Your Honor, and our chairman of the Committee of Energy addressed my concern in the last Congress when I brought this up. Nagpupush tayo ng energy-efficient vehicles. Pero may situation in the Philippines na in our desire to push for energy-efficient vehicles, hindi naman dumaan sa proseso itong ibang vehicles na kumuha ng franchise. Ang nangyari, nakadagdag ng isang katutak na traffic na taking away valuable time of people's lives, quality of life na dagdag sa traffic because may dagdag na public vehicles na hindi naman kumuha ng franchise. So my point, Your Honor, is if we continue to work together, we can ensure that our bills and the laws that we pass are more sustainable. Yun lang naman yung point ko, Your Honor.
I'm so glad. I am ever grateful. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. And yes, all the actions we take must be aligned with the SDGs, even if the SDGs will expire
In 2030.
In 2030.
7 years.
Within 7 years, and we have not even reached our targets. And let me just state, Mr. President, siguro pagkatapos po ng Sustainable Development Goals, in fact, dapat ngayon, hindi ba dapat restorative? Kasi ang sustainable, sinusustain lang natin. Pero kung restorative ang attitude natin, gusto natin i-restore mula sa kanyang panimula. Ibig sabihin kung nasira, hindi lang natin sustaining it is, the way it is now. O yan, wag mong abusuhin. But restoring it is even going one step further. But that's for the United Nations to decide. It's something that came across my mind because we want to leave this world in a better place than when we found it. We don't just want to leave it and sustain it, leave it, ganyan na. Pagandahin pa natin.
Of course.
Kaya ako po'y natutuwa at gagawa po ako ng resolution. Sana mag-co-author kayo yung aking mungkahi ng bawat Sustainable Development Goal. How has it become seemingly unattainable because of the climate crisis? And how has the Philippines responded by legislation or by budgetary allocation if we have done it. That is something which perhaps the LBRMO and the Secretariat, Attorney Garcia and everyone, DepSec Belen, can help us with. So thank you very much, Mr. President, to my esteemed colleague for her very enlightened interpellations.
Thank you, Senator P. Cayetano. Next to ask questions, interpellate is the gentleman from Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the good Senate President Pro Tem would yield to some questions, just 2 or 3.
Yes, it will be my honor, Mr. President, to answer any questions from the good gentleman from Colombia and Cavite.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Reminding me of my Colombia days just a few months ago. I was at a loss when I mentioned the words corporate social responsibility. People then inside the classroom were looking at the ceiling, probably hearing some words that came from the Jurassic age, Mr. President. I will be ending my questions relative to that. But may I ask the gentle lady from Capiz if she is aware of the
I'm
exact
from
fee-
Antique,
Antique,
and
I'm sorry.
our deputy
I was
minority leader-
I was looking at Senator Hontiveros. So I
But
have
there are
not.
Legardas from Capiz as well, so probably.
Yes. So may we know if she's aware of the exact Philippine budget committed to climate change initiatives?
The budget of the Climate Change Commission, you're correct, should not be the only climate budget. The DBM has done climate tagging, and based on the climate tagging, how much? Only 400? 432. According to the Climate Change Commission, they have tagged 432 billion out of our 5 trillion budget. Napakaliit nun to climate. That is what? Can you compute the percentage? That's why I've always said it should be a whole of government, a whole of nation, a whole of society, a whole of budget approach. If the DBM has only tagged 432 billion of the 5 trillion budget for climate, paano na yung iba? Hindi ba dapat parang yung sinasaloob na natin, lahat ng galaw natin, akma po dyan? That's why also I suggested and recommended the passage of the bill on PENCAS, the Natural Resource Accounting, kasi po hindi isinaalang-alang ang epekto sa ating kapaligiran, kalikasan, and the natural environment ng lahat ng ating ginagawa. Pero natutuwa naman ako, NEDA has already started using it, right? NEDA started using it. PENCAS, Natural Resource Accounting. This was already done by the United Nations many years ago, and it is suggested, I hope that we pass it into law, that the natural resource accounting, in short, pag meron tayong inallocate na budget, ay dapat alam natin yung epekto nito sa hangin at sa pag nagkakwari, sabi natin sa mga bundok natin, dahil kailangan naman, dahil meron construction o anong epekto, guguho ang bundok. Pag gumuho ang bundok, maaaring yung malapit na tulay ay mahulog at paano magko-construct. So anyway, so back to the budget, 453 billion, which is 9% of the 5 trillion budget. That is what is allocated, Mr. President, to climate. But I think it should be greater because dapat talaga all-encompassing sa buong budget.
I totally agree, Mr. President. And I think there are press announcements today that the President, while he was in Switzerland, made an important announcement that the climate change budget for the Philippines would be increased in front of the other world leaders. Is the Senate President Pro Tem aware of that commitment made by the President?
I'm not privy to the exact words used by the President. When you say the climate change budget, I am wondering now, is it for adaptation? spread out in the different agencies of government? Or is it for the Climate Change Commission? I doubt if he was referring to that. But really, that's good news. But what I would encourage and humbly recommend, with all due respect, Mr. President, would be a whole-of-nation approach. That's why we should marry the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and mitigation and now loss and damage so that everything we do, sabi ko nga, maski na sa defense, di ba? Nasa defense, ang DND, ang DILG, lahat ng kanilang ginagawa hanggang greening the supply chain sa agrikultura at sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. Ito'y makakatipid sa atin dahil tataas ang ating level ng adaptation at liliit ang ating kawalan ng kabuhayan. The loss of livelihoods and the loss of lives will be reduced if we are prepared and if we apply this to all government agencies in all our actions.
Thank you. I totally agree, Mr. President. And for the record, Mr. President, I think the current administration has been doing something. In fact, even before that Switzerland trip, and the acting presiding officer probably would be happy to hear this, the President issued an executive order or a circular exempting from taxes all electric vehicles coming from abroad. So, Mr. President, these initiatives would definitely augur well for a net zero or carbon neutral emission process in our country. Would the Senate
Yes.
President Pro Temp agree? So hindi naman po nagkukulang yung ating pamahalaan.
Yes. You're correct. In fact, we acknowledge that. That is very important because one of the most, the sources of pollution are the mobile, it's
Correct.
transport. The mobile
Correct.
sources of pollution more than the industrial sources. But that is just the aspect of air, but very important, Mr. President, and I hope that we can transition already to e-vehicles with that
Yes.
executive order. But then when you think about it, e-vehicles, saan po natin kukunin ang enerhiya sa e-vehicles? Dapat hindi sa fossil fuel ang source niyan.
Correct.
Dapat renewable din po.
Correct.
Bagamat yung transport niya mismo ay dapat yung source of energy niya kung saan niya pinaplug ay fueled not by fossil fuel but by RE as well.
Correct, renewable energy. Mr. President, now shifting to my next topic, which is related to the first sentence I mentioned a while ago, Mr. President, it would appear, coming from the Senate President Pro Temp herself, that the whole of nation approach would involve not just the government, but even the private sector. And when we talk about the private sector, we now look at the role of the private sector in all of these climate change initiatives. And I mentioned a while ago, during my classroom days, a few months ago, people were staring at the ceiling when I mentioned corporate social responsibility. It appears, Mr. President, the buzzword now is no longer CSR.
No, not
The
CSR.
buzzword now is ESG,
Of course,
environment,
sustainable governance.
social
Social
governance.
Yes.
So, Mr. President, when we look at the records, and I have here in front of me a new paper coming from PwC, Price Waterhouse, it would appear, Mr. President, that coming out of the pandemic, and I'd like to have this on record, coming out of the pandemic, governments became more trusted than the business sector. Mas pinagtitiwalaan kasi ang gobyerno ang nagbigay ng bakuna, ang gobyerno ang tumulong sa mamamayan para makalabas sa pandemic. May I know from the good Senate President Pro Temp if she has an idea how much is the ESG budget of the business sector in the Philippines? If we are now requiring
Yes.
the DNR, the DA, even the NEDA, and even all the LGUs, how much are the various corporations. Let's just look at the top 100, committing the resources to climate change initiatives.
Yes. I'm glad that you mentioned that. ESG has been here for some time. In fact, the Securities and Exchange Commission has already issued the guidelines. Is it a memorandum or the guidelines for ESG? This is memorandum number 4, way back in 2019. In
Yes.
fact, I remember during the pandemic, I enjoyed the Zoom meetings, and the ESG was a subject matter during the pandemic in many hearings. In fact, just a few months ago, I will share it with the body. I delivered the keynote speech for the Securities and Exchange Commission on environment, social governance, or ESG. Now, you're correct. It used to be CSR during our time of long ago, and it has shifted to ESG, and that is the role that the private sector should take. Now, what is the budget for the private sector? That is a computation I don't have in my mind. I am not certain what budget each corporation in the top 100 corporations have allocated for that. That is something I have to look into. Do we have the budgets? No, we don't have that yet. Since it's a fairly new concept of 3 years ago, and the SEC has only issued the memo in 2019. And in fact, there was this capacity building webinar or workshop where I delivered the speech a few months ago. Maybe they are building the capacity of the private sector. That is why perhaps there may, I would think, not be an ESG budget for the private sector.
Yes, Mr. President, the reason why I raised that is because we kept on hammering and nudging the national government, the executive branch in particular, to allocate more funds for climate change initiatives, where now we are overlooking the budget allocated by private corporations and how government is encouraging private corporations to allocate certain funds for their ESG and climate change initiatives. And for the record, Mr. President, what I have here is that 60 to 69% of Asia-Pacific CEOs have committed to either net zero or carbon neutral targets well above their peers, their global peers by 9 to 13%. But from the list that I have here, and this is a publication by PwC, the Asia-Pacific countries, while outperforming their global peers in reducing carbon intensity in 2021, the Philippines is not included. Mentioned as the leading countries are Australia, surprisingly China is here, Indonesia, Malaysia, New Zealand, South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. So, Mr. President, there is really a need for collaborative actions between government, business, and investors, to continue this drive to achieve a net zero or carbon neutral target. So this decarbonization journey, which I totally support, and I laud the good Senate President Pro Tem for raising this again, is not just should not just be a stronghold or the turf of the national government, but the business community should be there. I'm not casting doubt on what the business sector is doing, but from the report that I gathered here, it is still wanting in several aspects. So, Mr. President, if the good Senate President Pro Tem would agree with me, perhaps it's about time that we encourage the private sector, provide initiatives, and place a cap. If the ideal target for a good defense budget is 4% of the total national budget, perhaps there should also be an ideal budget for ESG, climate change initiatives for corporations.
Thank you very much for that. May I humbly suggest, Mr. President, just like I suggested that our whole GAA and our whole action as government leaders should be a whole of government approach. The private sector should not just have CSR before or ESG now, but in every action they take, they must take the issues of sustainability and ESG into consideration, Mr. President. And to be fair, there are many of our big, small, our MSMEs, and even the top corporations and our government leaders who have initiated climate action, who have done both mitigation and adaptation. In fact, for many years, I've worked with the SM Group, the Disaster Risk Reduction branch of the United Nations based in Geneva. It used to be called the UNISDR. They had a private sector council, and Hansi I introduced him to Margareta Wallström, who was the head of the UNISDR maybe 10 years ago. And he took it upon himself to create the private sector council. The advisor then was Tony Loizaga, who was with the Manila Observatory, who eventually became our DNR secretary. So the private sector, it's not just SM, even Ayala. Big and small companies have their own contribution, perhaps even much better than government. Dahil puhunan nila yan mga tao nila yan gobyerno. Ang gobyerno, sana nga mas kasing efficient insofar as environmental sustainability is concerned. So if I may suggest, Mr. President, we should not put a cap on how much they should allocate for ESG, but in every action they take, in every policy they do, in every corporate decision they make, must take into consideration the effect on the environment, the effect on our social welfare, the effect on our people, on nature and people. But I will get, as you suggested, what is the estimate ESG budget of the private sector. That's something, because when they report to the SEC, I am told that there is a reportorial portion on their sustainability reporting. So if we get the sum total, because the SEC, as I mentioned, in 2019 issued guidelines for corporations to report on their sustainability moves or actions. If we put all the submissions in the SEC together, then that would be the sum total of the private sector's ESG report.
I totally agree that there should be no cap, but I think we should encourage the increase because as my readings would point, there is an ESG revolution going on right now, and societal and business needs would later on converge. And this convergence would really augur well for climate change initiatives. So, Mr. President, I have no further questions. I can prolong this for another hour, but I have no more questions. I thank the good Senate President Pro Tem for raising this again, very timely, coming from the President coming from that Switzerland trip, and timely likewise because of that electric car incentive. But then again, I raised the ESG buzzword. E stands for the environment, S for the social, G for the pillar, and if we can just increase this granularly to a higher level, I think gaps within government initiatives would surely be filled and can be filled through the private sector. Once again, thank you, Madam Senate President Pro Tem, for raising this issue once again. Maraming salamat po.
I am grateful to your honor, Mr. President, for asking very important questions that brought to the fore the pivoting of the private sector from CSR to ESG and how ESG must be embraced by big and small corporations. I'm grateful. Always I learn from the good senator from Colombia and Cavite.
Thank you, Senator Tolentino. Next to interpolate is our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa.
let's see a sample SEC report.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Good gentlewoman from Antique, mari po bang magtanong ng iilang mga supportive questions sa kanilang privilege speech?
I am ready and honored to answer any and all questions of the good gentle lady from Capiz and the Philippines.
Salamat, Mr. President. Nice magkaroon ng interpellation sa mga panay nun. Kung pwede lang sa hiligay nun. Mr. President, gentle lady, nagbabala na po yung Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change o IPCC na sa 2030, so a mere 7 years from now, ay mararamdaman natin ang kakulangan sa pagkain. Parang naunahan pa nga nung bansa natin ang IPCC dahil ngayon pa lang namumroblema tayo sa iba't ibang pagkain, sa supply at presyo. Sunod-sunod, halos dadaanan yata yung listahan ng bahay kubo na mga halaman at hindi lamang mga halaman, mga karne at isda sa ganitong kakulangan ng pagkain. At nagbabala din ng IPCC na sa 2050, so just 27 years from now, isang henerasyon na lamang, ay makakaramdam tayo ng taggutom. Bunsod ng epekto ng global warming. So direct causality dahil sa global warming, gutom. So ano po ang ginagawa ng pamahalaan dito? Ano na rin ang ginagawa ng private sector dito? At ano ang ginagawa ng civil society dito, Mr. President?
Salamat sa inyong katanungan. Hindi po tayo kailangan mag-antay ng 2030, di ba? Ngayon at sa nakaraang taon, nakakaramdam na ang marami sa ating kababayan po ng gutom na hindi naman po dapat dahil napakayaman po ng Pilipinas, ang ating karagatan, ang ating lupain. Hindi po tayo dapat mang-angkat ng pagkain dahil if we grow our own food, we can even export the food that we eat. An example po, sa mga nakaraang buwan ay nag-aangkat tayo ng asin. Ang asin po ay marami po ang aking probinsya ng Antique. Reregaluhan ko po kayong lahat ng aming napakasarap na asin galing po sa aming maliit na LGU na Belison. At kung pari ko pong banggitin, nung pandemya po, yun po ang isa sa mga MSME projects ko nung madalas po kami mag-Zoom. Dahil po out of 18 LGUs, 15 ang coastal at may industriya ng asin na mamamatay na, kaya binigyan natin ng dole kabuhayan na buhay ng muli. So, what I'm
Mr.
saying
President,
is,
gentle
yes.
lady, if I may just add at this point, pati nga po for one, among several, yung lalawigan ng Pangasinan
Yes.
ay mayroon din palang
Salt making.
native na salt industry at
Yes.
dun pa nga nakuha yung kanilang hindi maalat na pangalan ng
Pangasinan.
Opo.
At saka ang Ilocos. Nanay ko kasi Ilocana. At saka yung, is it Albuquerque in Bohol?
Opo, merong Albuquerque
Special
sa Bohol. Opo.
asin na galing medyo orange ang itsura. So, what I'm saying is that, yes, the issue of food security, yan po ay nakaakibat sa issue ng climate crisis. Siyempre, pag umiinit ang panahon, ay iinit ang surface water. Magkakaroon ng coral bleaching. Ang corals, alam natin, bahay ng isda. Maaapektuhan ang mga isda at maaapektuhan siyempre ang mga mangingisda, ang kanilang income, ang kanilang mga binibigay sa atin as food on our table. Again, masasabi ko, halos hindi na makain sa dami ng tuna at mga isda sa amin sa Northern Antique. Ang yaman-yaman. Kailangan lang ng storage, kailangan ng blast freezer, kailangan ng value added, turuan sila sigurong i-chop, i-bottle, mag-processing, ganun. So, alamin lang natin ang sources ng ating pagkain sa bawat probinsya, mag-mapping tayo ng ating karagatan, ng ating lupa, ng ating kabundukan. Iba pa yung ating mga puno at mga gulay, mahuhulog na lang ang mga abokado at mga mangga at hindi kayang kainin ng lahat ng mga tao. At sa aming probinsya, tuwing summer, kailangan lang ng fruit processing facilities. So what I'm saying is that
we're a country where not a single family needs to go hungry because we can grow our own food and even export it to the next province. And in fact, our province exports our food to neighboring provinces like Aklan because there is Boracay there as an island. And so, yes, 2030 is a deadline, but we're experiencing hunger and deprivation as early as in the years past. But it should not be. What have we done? Government has many programs to give equipment and capital assistance to our fisher folks and our farmers. Yung pagbibigay po ng BIFAR ng ating mga community fish landing ay mahalaga. Husay-husayan naman nila ang pag-construct ng fish landing sa tamang lugar. Ang pagbibigay po natin ng mga fishing boats, fiberglass fishing boats ay nakatulong. Higit po sa 1,000 ang nabigay po natin through BIFAR no ako po'y congressman ng Antique at dumoble po, I think if you can get the number, that was from my State of a District address, ang huli dahil po dumami din ang ating pagbigay ng fiberglass fishing boats. Meron tayong mga policies na pending po dito, ang ating Food Forest Gardening Act, babasahin ko, meron po tayong Zero Food Waste Bill. We have I mentioned it earlier, the PENCAS, which is a United Nations initiative of many years ago, which the NEDA is already using, not yet enacted into law. I hope we can enact it. That's documenting our natural resource accounting. Binanggit ko na rin po yung Food Forest Gardening Act. Meron po tayo yung Single-Use Plastics Regulation. Kung titignan po natin sa ating koridor po ngayon, ang gaganda po ng mga letrato at captions po kung paano po nakakasira ang single-use plastic sa ating karagatan na nachochoke ang bahay ng isda, ang mga corals at naaapektuhan. Nandyan po yung nag-launch po kaninang umaga ang Oceana at ang Mother Earth Foundation, Eco Waste Coalition at Greenpeace at Climate Change Commission.
Pati mga malalaking marine animals, Mr. President,
Yes.
Gentle Lady, tulad ng mga pawikan at iba pa ay nabubulunan.
Minsan
sa
linuluwa
mga kahit
nila,
iniluluwa or kung hindi na mailuwa ay nasasakal na lamang. Sa
Tama.
mga plastic waste, pati nga sa mga microplastic na nag-show up na sa mga katawan ng mga pagkaing dagat na hinuhuli natin.
You're
Kaya
correct.
nga kahit ngayong mga taon ng pandemya, yung simpleng paalala na kapag itinatapon na natin yung ating mga disposable face masks na may ilang plastic component din, na punitin yung loop para nga hindi mahuli at hindi masakal yung mga malalaking marine animals na kasama ng marine ecosystem
Tama po
natin.
kayo. Isa pa po, no? I'm drafting a bill, I hope you can co-author it with me, on greening the supply chain. At isa pong nakakatuwang
Mr.
NGO
President.
na may malasakit na mag-asawa, si Andy at si Ace Estrada, natuklasan ko rin nung pandemya, ay sila po ay gumagawa ng rescue buys. Meron pong mga magsasaka galing po sa Santa Catalina, Ilocos Sur, galing po sa iba't ibang mga probinsya sa Cordillera. Rinirescue po nila. Ano pong ibig sabihin nito? Ay nag-harvest ng maaga. Marami ang harvest. Walang bibili doon. Dito po dadalhin sa Maynila. Nasa Facebook po sila at marami pong nag-pre-order sa Facebook. Ang ginawa ko po, bumili po, believe it or not, you might think I'm crazy, I bought 1 ton. 1 tonelada ng cauliflower. Meron bang Tagalog cauliflower? Cauliflower.
Yun na po yun, opo.
Ang binili ko po nung bagong taon. At pinamahagi ko po ito sa Barangay Tatalon sa Quezon City. Marami pong informal settlers doon at may grupo po ng mga nanay. Ang tawag po, Nanay Power. Na-empower po natin ang Nanay Power mula po sa rescue buys ng Rural Rising NGO na nandyan po sa UP Diliman na galing po sa Santa Catalina, Ilocos Sur. Natulungan na yung magsasaka, natulungan pa yung NGO ng mag-asawa at nabigyan po ng pagkain. Hindi lang nga yung usual na mga gift packs na binibigyan ng gobyerno na puro sachet at plastic. Ay ito po ay gulay. Next week po sa Tuesday, papakilala ko po sa Senado at lahat po ng departamento, more than 100 departments in the Senate, ako po'y magpapahanda ng konti ng ilang tonelada po ng gulay ang dadaling ko dito. Meron po tayong game na bayong all you can. Kasi yung Rural Rising po, meron po silang buy all you can. No, box all you can. Ang ginawa ko po imbis na mag-Christmas party po kami sa opisina, dinala ko po sila sa isang bahay ng Rural Rising sa UP Diliman at yung mga staff na nagtrabaho on that Friday, may kahon. $7.99 po ang presyo ng isang kahon at kumuha sila ng lahat. May squash, may cauliflower, may broccoli. Ang sasarap, ang tatamis ng mga malalaking mga strawberries. Ayan, nag-box all you can. Pero sa Senado, dahil marami po kayo at baka masyado naman ako mabaon sa utang kung gagawin kong box all you can, bayong all you can ang gagawin po natin next week.
Ipagpapasalamat na rin po
Yes.
natin, Mr. President, Gentle Lady, yung bayong all you can na iyon. Aabangan po namin ang event po na iyon bilang bahagi ng inyong at ating advokasya. Maraming salamat po dun sa sagot ninyo sa ilang mga tanong ko. Palagay ko naghahalo na sa sagot nito na ito, Mr. President, Gentle Lady, yung ginagawa na at yung maaaring gawin pa. So, harinawa, sa babalang ito ng IPCC na ang Gentle Lady po ang isa sa importanteng mga prophetic voices na ine-echo, ina-amplify ito sa ating bansa, ay maging wake-up call po talaga sa bawat sektor natin, sa gobyerno, sa anong pwedeng gawin, pati na sa agricultural mapping at food processing, lalong-lalo na po siguro ang DA at saka DTI. Kaya rin po, Gentle Lady, yung patuloy kong panawagan na makapag-appoint na si Presidente ng full-time na DA Secretary, maaring wake-up call din po sa ating private sector, lalo na po yung nasa sa ganitong mga industriya na agrikultura, food processing nga po, industry, at pati na po sa civil society, lalo na po yung mga pinaka-vulnerableng sektor ng ating lipunan na at handang-handa at gustong-gustong makipagtulungan sa private sector at sa gobyerno para tugunan itong, sabi nga ng Gentle Lady, Mr. President, existential question of our age. Dako po ako sa pangalawang tanong ko po. Medyo konektado rin pero baka may gustong idagdag ang Gentle Lady. Ano pa po ang mga programa o hakbang na ginagawa ng pamahalaan, ng private sector at ng civil society upang particularly ma-mitigate ang climate change? Bagamat sinabi na po ng Gentle Lady, Mr. President, na medyo lumalampas na tayo sa puntong iyon na mitigation dahil nasa survival mode na talaga dapat, ano pa po ang kaya at dapat nating gawin by way of climate change mitigation, Mr. President?
Ganito po. Tayo po, naniniwala naman ako dapat tayo mag-mitigate dahil mitigation as a function of adaptation. In short, nakakatulong po mag-mitigate o magbawas ng pagbuga ng greenhouse gas emissions dahil it's the way to go. Pero ang tingin ko po, kasing halaga o mas mahalaga yung pagsasabuhay ng adaptation. Ang ating pagturo sa mga lokal na pamahalaan sa bawat barangay, una, paggamit ng early warning system para po hindi pumalaot ang mga mangingisda sa panahon po na nag-warning ang pag-asa. Pangalawa, climate resilient agriculture. Itanim nila ang mga binhi na akma sa pagbabago ng klima. Siyempre, nung panahon ng kabataan natin, my dear colleague from Capiz, iba na po ang pag-grow o pagtanim o pag-usbong ng mga halaman at kinakain noon ng 1960s at 70s at saka ngayon. So kailangan yung climate resilient agriculture. Pangatlo, water impoundment at harvesting. Ito po'y no-brainer at napakasimple. At sana may pagkakataong ipakita ko sa inyo, mismong sa bahay ko at sa farm kong maliit, hindi ko po inhenyero ang gumawa, ako po ay kumukolekta ng tubig ulan na siyang ginagamit ko po sa mga gulay na aking tinatanim para hindi naman chlorinated water ang ating gagamitin pandilig. Yung sustainable transport, nabanggit kanina ni Senator Tolentino na meron memo or executive order na incentive para sa mga electric vehicles, mabuti yan, para maging sustainable ang ating transport. Sana ang mass transport ay maging mas efficient din. At natutuwa tayo, nabalitaan natin na nagsimula na daw ang subway para kung meron maayos na efficient na subway system, mababawasan na po ang mga pribadong sasakyan sa ating mga kalsada. Energy efficient technologies, ang ating transition towards renewable energy, 2008 pa lang, may batas na po tayo, 2023 na po. Sana po mas lumaki pa sa energy portfolio ng buong bansa ang renewable energy na kasing mura o mas mura pa kaysa fossil fuel at hindi tayo kailangan gumamit ng US dollars, ng ating foreign currency at hindi natin inaangkat. We do not import fossil fuels because these are renewable energy because these are natural in our country. At saka yung natural resource management at natural resource restoration. Yung ating pag-database ng ating yamang dagat, yamang lupa, wetlands. Kaya nga meron tayong higit na 114 protected areas at wetlands na dapat alam ng bawat PAMBI, ang Protected Area Management Bureau, ang yaman nila at kung paano aalagaan. Kasi pag inaalagaan po natin ang ating protected areas, dadami rin ang hindi lamang yan sa kalikasan, ang pagkain ng mga tao sa lugar na yon. So believe me, I am so convinced there is no reason for any Filipino family to go hungry because we are so rich. We are resource rich. We are food rich. Karagatan, lupa, bundok, maski saan po. At sinusubukan ko po to live by example. Ako po ay nagtatanim ng aking kinakaing gulay. Minsan yata ay nabibiyayaan ko kayo minsan ng gulay ko. Ang birthday gift ko kay Minority Leader ay bago kong harvest kahapon, kakapadala ko lang sa isang bayong kay Senator De La Rosa yata.
Including
Nagpadala din
this
ako.
representation, Madam.
Yes, and I can give you as well. So, believe it or not, during the pandemic, nabuhay ko po ang higit sa 25 families sa lockdown na linggo-linggo ko pong binibigyan ng libreng gulay na aking tinatanim at ang fertilizer po, hindi kami bumibili ng imported o sako-sako, kami po ang gumagawa mula sa food waste. Ibig sabihin po, I just had to do it myself dahil po paano ko magle-lecture, kung hindi ko naman alam kung paano ginagawa. So, kung kaya po ng isa, kaya po ng barangay, ng purok, ng sityo. Kung kaya ng purok at sityo, kaya po ng barangay. Kung kaya ng barangay, kaya ng municipality, kaya po ng lahat. Ang aking environmental lawyer po ay nandito. At siya po ay nagsasaka sa 1.5 hectares ng iba't ibang klase ng, ang tawag sa bigas natin, palay natin, Denorado rice. Oh, basmati rice.
Parang nakikilala ko po yung
Yes.
inyong resource
So,
person, Madam Chair. Very good to see her po dito
yes,
sa
so
Senado.
she's my environmental
Intensive
lawyer,
farming.
actually doing my legal counsel in my office, and ang regalo niya sa akin, yung black, brown, and white rice nung Pasko. And I decided to become a rice farmer myself. Hopefully by next cropping, ako po ay may maliit na hektarya din na aarkilahin ko para magtanim po ako ng, I want to be a rice farmer to see the difficulty and the challenges of a rice farmer. Kasi gulay farmer na po ako tree planter na po at saka gumagawa na po ng fertilizer at nag-harvest na po ng tubig ulan at gulay farmer na. Gusto ko ba maging rice farmer para makompleto po at hindi na ako kailangan bumili kailanman ng pagkain dahil binubuhay ko po at ang aking mga household staff at kamag-anak from the food that we grow. So, #grow your own food. Kailangan na grow our own food.
Harinawa nga po,
Sana yung
Mr.
25
President,
million
Madam Chair.
YouTube followers ni Senator Tulfo ay maturuan niya. Imagine, if you can influence your 25 million followers to grow your own food, that's 1/4 of our population.
Opo, Mr. President, gentle lady, and kaya nga ang wish ko ay harinawa na maging rice farmer din po kayo dahil precisely, gaya ng ibinanggit nyo kay Sen. Rafi, kung ma-replicate ito, ma-scale up ito, ma-cluster ito sa mga magkakatabing bayan, lalawigan, bansa, lampas sa atin, ay at least at dito bumabalik ako dun sa pangalawang tanong na ito, oo nga't hindi natin bibitawan yung mitigation, yung adaptation, at pwede nating kompletuhin yung menu ng mga climate change responses, mga global warming responses, hanggat umabot dun sa menu na siguro pine-prescribe dun sa binanggit, Mr. President, ng Gentle Lady na High Ambition Coalition. Actually, nakakatuwa nga po yung pangalan nun dahil kung titignan nga natin, hindi high ambition yun eh. Yan ay minimum requirements para sa survival ng ating species, ng lahat ng species ng buhay at ng buong planeta. Kaya huling tanong na lamang po, pangatlo huling tanong, Mr. President, Gentle Lady, paano po ang climate change actions natin, ang buong menu ng climate change actions natin, paano po nito ina-address yung mga pinaka-apektadong mga tao, ibig sabihin yung mga pinaka-vulnerableng mga sektor ng ating lipunan, Mr. President?
Ayon po sa ating Climate Change Act of 2009, which created the Small Commission on Climate Change, ay ang bawat lokal na pamahalaan ay meron LCCAP, Local Climate Change Action Plan. Yan po ang parang magiging Biblia nila kung paano po nila a-address ang vulnerability. Dahil hindi po pwedeng i-dikta ang ating climate change action dahil iba po ang vulnerabilities and hazards sa norte, iba naman sa Mindanao, iba po sa Kabikulan, iba po sa Panay. Kaya ang bawat LGU ay mandated to come up with their LCCAP at dun po ang kanilang adaptation and mitigation na susundin ayon sa kanilang mga vulnerabilities. Isa po yan sa mga requirement ng ating batas. Ilang LGU na comply ng LCCAP? Out of 80. That's good to know. 80% ng ating LGUs ng 1,600 more or less municipalities and cities have complied with the Local Climate Change Action Plan. That is just one of the many measures being done to address the issue of climate. Pangalawa, meron tayong amendment sa Climate Change Act, the PSF, pero hindi ako happy sa pag-implement ng PSF. Hindi naman kasalanan ng komisyon na maliit ito dahil ang pamamahala ng pondong to ay nililipat sa DBP or DOF. Sa DOF. Bagong gobyerno ngayon, so maybe it should be brought back to CCC or we must urge DOF to use the funds because under this law, 1 billion pesos must be allocated for climate projects of local governments as long as they apply for it. But again, submitting proposals is so difficult in this country. It takes months, if not years, for proposals to be accepted.
Actually, Gentle Lady, Mr. President, kung pamumunuan ng Gentle Lady iyong pag-revisit at posibleng pagsasagawa ng paglipat muli ng pamamahala ng pondong iyon sa Climate Change Commission. So, suportahan po nitong representasyon. Dahil bagamat, oo nga, mahalaga ang pinansya sa ating climate change at global warming responses, ay dapat yung buong worldview ng climate change response, global warming response, yung naka-embody siguro dun sa High Ambition Coalition, ay mas bagay talaga na pamahalaan ng Climate Change Commission, Gentle Lady.
I want to see a more, maybe I will sit with the PSF and find out where's the stumbling block, anong bakit ang bagal-bagal, nila hindi ginagastos ang pera. Dapat gastusin ang pera para tulungan ang mga lokal na pamahalaan.
At least dapat kasing bilis ng paglala ng climate crisis, hindi mas mabagal dahil ngayon pa lang ay humahabol na po tayo, Gentle Lady, Mr. President. So maraming salamat po, Mr. President, sa ating Gentle Lady. Sana po yung 80% ng mga LGUs na meron ng LCCAP o Local Climate Change Action Plan ay sinisigurong involved ang mga basic sectors sa kanilang sinasakupang teritoryo at yung 20% ng mga LGU na hindi pa nag-formulate ng kanilang LCCAP ay isama ang mga basic sectoral organizations at movements dahil kung tutuusin, frontliners sila sa climate crisis na ito at sa climate crisis response natin.
Ang Lambunaw, Iloilo kaya nakapagbigay na ng LCCAP.
I-check po natin.
Siguro magandang ipaalala
Gentle
po
Lady.
nyo sa inyong
Opo.
matalik na kaibigan.
Mr. President.
Na dating mayor.
Maraming salamat po, Gentle Lady, Mr. President. Mabuhay po kayo sa
Okay.
inyong privileged speech.
Maraming salamat. Thank you, Mr. President, for the very enlightening, engaging questions of our Deputy Minority Leader. And one day, I told the Climate Change Commission I would like to see an outstanding LCCAP of an LGU. I wonder if Bocaue, Bulacan has submitted its LCCAP. I would check if all the 18 LGUs of Antique have submitted an LCCAP. I wonder if Cagayan de Oro, where the Minority Leader is from, as well as the province of Isabela, where Senator Tulfo is from, would like to see the LCCAPs of these LGUs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ligarda. This juncture, we'd like to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Isabela Province and Davao City, the gentleman, the good Senator Rafi Tulfo. You are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to associate myself with the privileged speech of the very intelligent and beautiful Senator Lauren Legarda, Madam. If anyone can testify to the effects of climate change, it is us Filipinos. Last year, when Typhoon Carding hit the Philippines, it gave new meaning to rapid intensification when it blew up from a tropical storm with 50 miles per hour winds to a Category 5 monster with 155 miles per hour the next day. Signal number 5 po. Nung kabataan ko po, signal number 3, dilubyo na yun. At kung sasabihin mo na may signal number 5, malamang end of the world na po yun mga panahon na yun. Every year, we're bearing the brunt of climate change. It is clear that climate change increases the upper limit on typhoon strength and rain rate. That is also raises the average sea level and storm surge. Every year, the damage is exponentially increased by the wind speed. Storm surges, landslides, and floods have claimed lives, destroyed livelihood, halted business operations, and damaged utility infrastructures. Unfortunately, parang nasasanay na lang po tayo na taon-taon ay nasasalanta tayo ng bagyo at libu-libong buhay ang naapektuhan at bilyon ang halaga ng nawawala sa kagamitan at negosyo nating lahat. We should not get used to this. We should not rely on our people's resilience. Instead, we have to enact measures that could reverse or temper climate change. I am full support of all climate change policies that could recover our environment for our future generation. As chairman of the Committee on Energy, it is my priority to provide policies that would launch the use of sustainable sources of energy or clean energy. I filed a zero food waste bill that would address food waste that contributes to climate change, since food left in landfills release methane, a powerful greenhouse gas 25 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Methane gas lingers for 12 years and traps heat from the sun. Our irresponsible use of food products has an adverse impact on the physical and land itself. Moreover, it harms the biodiversity of the environment ecosystems. I'm also looking into filing a bill that will ban the use of tarpaulin during elections, because the tarps takes about 1,000 years to decompose. Patay na po tayong lahat, nandiyan pa ang mga tarp na may mga pagmumukha natin lahat. The tarpaulins end up in landfills and sometimes in bodies of water too, causing pollution and flood. We have to continue working on more laws that would reverse the damage we have done. Again, I commend the effort of MFS, my favorite senator, Lauren Legarda. Thank you, Mr. President. And by the way, Madam Senator, yung inyo pong suggestion kanina, noted po yun. Isishare ko po yan sa aking mga subscribers, yung pong inyong lahat ng programa sa climate change at sa mga food security. I will always be at your service. Just let me know and I'll be there for you. Salamat po, Mr.
Maraming salamat. Isa lang po hihingiling ko.
Yes, ma'am.
Sa dami-daming gusto nating gawin, kung ang 25 million followers mo sa YouTube ay sundin lang niya ang RA 9003,
Okay.
Ecological Solid Waste Management Law, na ngayon nag-celebrate tayo ng Zero Waste Month dahil 22 years na yung batas sa paghihiwalay ng basura sa nabubulok at hindi nabubulok ay ang laking utang na loob ko at makakatulong talaga sa maraming mahihirap sa atin. Pagkatapos po ng ating sesyon, kasama ng inyong mga staff, tignan po nyo ang mga ehemplo kung paano ang dumi ng karagatan at ng informal settler areas nakakaawa dahil sa napakaraming plastic na hindi po sinesegregate o hinihiwalay ang basura. Kaya sa dami po ng ating pinag-usapan, maski yun na lang ang ecological solid waste management. Ang paghiwalay ng basura sa nabubulok, hindi nabubulok, ang laking bagay. Kung ma-impluensya nyo, ma-udyok nyo ang inyong 25 million YouTube. Dahil ako hanggang ngayon wala pa pong YouTube. Makiki-YouTube na lang ako sa inyo. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Well said. Done na po yun. I'll do it, as you say. Thank you po.
Thank you,
President.
Senator Raffy Tulfo. And before we recognize the majority leader, we'd like to commend our Senate President Pro Tempore for consistently fighting and advocating issues on preservation of environment. Kahit na para ka man lone voice before, nobody cares about the environmental issues before. But clearly, it's a clear and present danger that we really have to act with urgency regarding global warming and climate change. So we commend our Senate President Pro Tempore for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Majority
Signing
Leader.
Officer, Majority
Yes,
Leader.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to associate myself to the privileged speech delivered by our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Loren Legarda, and would like to put on record, Mr. President, that during the recent annual meeting at Davos, it was highlighted that 3.6 billion people worldwide are dangerously exposed and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Countries do not have equal footing in terms of the impacts that will be felt, but no country and no economy is immune from the climate crisis. And so we thank the distinguished lady, our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Loren Legarda, for being consistent and being contagious as well, Mr. President, because ever since I joined this August chamber, I'm being influenced by our Senate President Pro Tempore. Kanina, Mr. President, I made mention about the Biennale, Mr. President. I was asked to go there. I was in Milan. I was pulled by our good friend, Senator Legarda, to go to Biennale and then come back to Milan, Italy, Mr. President. And she's not aware that it will take all of my day, Mr. President, that day. But I wouldn't mind, and I'm so happy that I was part of it. Mr. President, I also would like to put on record that last Congress, we filed a bill requiring companies to have a clear plan on the disposal and recycling of beverage containers. And this bill was eventually integrated into this extended Producers Responsibility Act, or Republic Act number 11898. Thank you to our dear colleagues headed by Senator Cynthia Villar. And this Congress, Mr. President, we continue to advocate for the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Act, or EITI. The Department of Finance already throw in their wholehearted support on this particular measure, because this will be Freedom of Information Act for the extractive industries, Mr. President. And we are glad to note that no less than Senator Legarda was very influential in this representation's advocacies to push for these measures, including the Single-Use Plastics Regulation and Management Act, SBN number 246, which this representation co-authored. So again, Mr. President, we would like to thank our dear colleague, Senator Legarda, for this privileged speech, and we are in full support of her advocacy in ensuring that we will have a better Philippines. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Thank you for sharing the advocacy. Thank you for your vigor and your passion. Thank you to all our esteemed colleagues for their support, not just for me, it's really for us, for the whole Filipino people and the next generation. Thank you, Mr. President.
With that, Mr. President, I move that we refer the speech of the distinguished lady from Antique, our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Loren Legarda, and together with all the interpellations and manifestations to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources and Climate Change, Mr. President. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, so referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, upon the instruction of the chairperson of the Second Congressional Commission on Education, Senator Win Gatchalian, may I just manifest for the record that pursuant to Section 10 of the Republic Act number 11899, or the Education Commission 2 Technical Secretariat has been organized together with its Executive Director, Dr. Carol Mark R. Yee, and that EDCOM 2 will now formally convene. I so manifest, Mr. President.
Manifestation is noted.
We have with us, Mr. President, and we'd like to acknowledge Dr. Yee, who is in the gallery right now, and thank you for your presence, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Carl Markey is recognized and welcome to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
President, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Committee Report number 17 on Senate Bill number 1604. This is an act establishing an academic recovery and accessible learning oral program. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1604 under Committee Report number 17.
Is there objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Consideration of Senate Bill number 1604 is now in order. With the permission of the body, the Secretary will read only the title of the bill without prejudice to insert into the record the whole text thereof.
An act establishing an academic recovery and accessible learning oral program, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we recognize the distinguished gentleman from the city of Valenzuela, Senator Win Gatchalian, as chairperson of the Committee on Basic Education, to deliver the sponsorship speech.
Senator Win Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. As we usher into the new year, more than 2/3 of our population have received at least 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccines. Cases have stayed at manageable levels since the last major surge in January. Lockdowns have become a thing of the past, and the new normal has taken hold. Now that we have learned to live with COVID-19, we are at the stage where we can optimistically say that the worst of this pandemic is finally behind us, at least from the public health perspective. Viewed from an economic lens, however, the road to recovery from the consequences of the pandemic is just beginning. Data from UNESCO Data Institute show that basic education schools in the country were closed for about 375 school days between the first quarter of 2019 to 2020 school year up until the 2021 to 2022 school year. This is equivalent to 1.8 school years, the longest period of COVID-19 school closures in the entire world. As a result of such protracted closures, the World Bank estimated that there could be a decrease of 1.4 to 1.7 years in learning-adjusted years of schooling, LACE for short, due to the pandemic. LACE is an index combining quantity and quality of learning. From 7.5 years pre-pandemic, LACE could fall between 5.8 to 6.1 years, translating to learning losses of about 19 to 23% in terms of LACE. Learning loss refers to any loss of knowledge or skills, or deceleration or interruption of academic process, most commonly due to extended gaps or discontinuities in a student's education. Another metric that quantifies learning loss is learning poverty. These recent estimates of the World Bank, UNICEF, and UNESCO show that 0.4% percentage point increase in learning poverty from an already high rate of 90.5% in July 2021 to 90.9% in June of 2022. This, using actual enrollment figures for school year 2021 to 2022, this translates to 1.7 million out of the 1.87 million grade 5 learners in the country who cannot read and understand a simple story. Unfortunately, the estimates from international organizations are backed up by actual assessments data collected by the Department of Education with the support of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. The Comprehensive Rapid Literary Assessment, or CRLA, measures the grade readiness or non-readiness of early grade learners. For grade 1 learners, the assessment covers their proficiency in applicable mother tongue-based multilingual education subject, such as Tagalog or Bicol. Grade 2 learners are assessed on their Filipino language skills, while grade 3 learners are assessed on their English skills. According to the CRLA conducted at the beginning of 2021 to 2022 school year in the National Capital Region, more than one-third of the 358,922 grade 1 to grade 3 learners assessed do not have the basic set of literacy competencies to be considered ready for grade levels they are in. The data from the CRLA conducted in the Bicol region during the same period are even more alarming. Approximately 75% of the 405,161 grade 1 to grade 3 learners assessed in the Bicol region do not have the basic set of literacy competencies to be considered ready for the grade levels they are in. That is 3 out of every 4 learners assessed. Significantly, the National Economic and Development Authority further estimates that school closures in the Philippines will cost about 10.1 trillion in wage and productivity losses over the next 40 years. This is about 42% of the country's projected nominal GDP for 2022, an alarming large figure. The long-term economic losses projected by NEDA are the results of learning losses suffered during the pandemic. Left unattended, the severe economic consequences of learning loss resulting from the pandemic will be borne by our current basic education learners and the country as a whole for the next 4 decades. This is not a situation we can let stand. In this context, I'm sponsoring the Academic Recovery and Accessible Learning, or ARAL Program Act. This legislation seeks to establish a free and effective national intervention program to provide learners who experience pandemic-driven learning losses with supplemental lessons to close learning gaps and enable them to catch up to the standards required in their respective grade levels. Once passed into law, the ARAL Program Act will institutionalize a tutorial-based system for learning loss recovery in our education system. This program will be applied not only to COVID-19 related learning losses, but also to other instances of loss of knowledge and skills due to gaps or discontinuities in a learner's education, whether today or in the future. Under the ARAL program, no learner will be left behind. This law would require the Department of Education to consolidate, retool, and expand its existing pandemic-related learning recovery interventions into an institutionalized national learning intervention program for students enrolled in public and private basic education institutions. The ARL program shall cover the essential learning competencies under the K-12 basic education curriculum, with an emphasis on fundamental reading and numeracy skills. Language and mathematics will be covered for grades 1 to 10, while science will also be covered from grades 3 to 10. Specifically, the ARAL program will provide for the following key interventions: well-systemized tutorial sessions which demonstrate higher achievement gains, well-designed intervention plans and learning losses following a learner-centered approach that is supportive and emphatic of the learner's needs, motivation and behavior, effective and accessible delivery modes for tutors and learners, careful determination and assessment of learners, involvement of curriculum and reading specialists and other stakeholders, well-chosen and trained tutors and learning facilitators, and adequate development and provision of nutritional, social, emotional, and mental health programs to support and ensure the holistic well-being of learners, build resilience against adversity, and equip them with skills and confidence to seek help for early intervention during their educational journey. Learners in need of enrollment in ARAL program due to the pandemic-related schooling stoppages will be identified by the Department of Education through its learner information system, which it is also mandated to update. Meanwhile, learners who have not reached the minimum proficiency levels in core subjects shall also be enrolled in the program based on assessment results. The heart and soul of the ARAL program is the transfer of knowledge from qualified tutors to recovering learners. As such, recovering learners will engage in specialized, hands-on tutorial sessions with an army of teachers, para-teachers, and tertiary level students who are at or above 75 percentile of their respective school cohorts in the subject they will be teaching, and receive positive feedback on a mock tutorial session assessment administered by DepEd. To ensure that the ARAL program tutorials will result in the highest possible improvement of learning outcomes for recovering learners, tutors will be required to undergo capacity building training, focusing on effective pedagogies, interpersonal skills, social emotional learning, cultural competencies, and other topics that will empower them to help recovering learners shore up their essential learning competencies. Essentially, the ARAL program will fully harness the great potential of our country's professional educators and educators in training to guide recovering learners along the path to academic achievement and success in later life. Teachers and para-teachers will be compensated accordingly from public funds. Tutorial services provided tutorial services provided by pre-service teachers under this act shall also be considered relevant teaching experience when applying for plantilla positions with DepEd schools. Meanwhile, tertiary level students will receive literacy training service credits under the National Service Training Program, or NSTP. Another important thrust of the ARA program is to foster more equitable access to online learning materials for learners and tutors. In line with this, public telecommunication entities will be required to provide free access to all DepEd exclusively hosted learning management system applications, including web-based applications, online educational platforms, digital libraries, and other online knowledge hubs exclusively hosted by DepEd. Significantly, no data charges will be incurred by learners and tutors while using applications under the bill. The ARAL Program Act also mandates the DepEd to provide learners and tutors with subsidized data plans for the use of these applications. The bill also reiterates the provision of the Children's Television Act of 1997, which requires broadcasting networks to air supplemental tutorial video materials within the regular programming schedule. Compliance with this provision shall be a requirement for the renewal of their respective franchises. This legislation also requires the DepEd to involve local government units, as well as parents and guardians of learners in the process of learning recovery. Mr. President, the ARAL Program Act has benefited from the active collaboration of several public and private stakeholders during the public hearing and 4 technical working group meetings of the Committee on Basic Education. As chair of the committee, I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their indispensable contributions. From the public sector, the DepEd, NCCT, CHED, TESDA, DBM, DILG, NTC, DITC, DOF, NEDA, and PIDS. From the private sector, PNU, PIMEA, PEMEA, UNICEF, ULAP, Globe, DITO, and SMART. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I've spoken at length in the past about the education crisis our country is currently facing. The crisis was already existing well before the pandemic. COVID-19 has only made things worse. In this context, the ARAL program is an essential piece of education reform legislation designed to help our learners get back on track. Based on NEDA's projection, this legislation is also critical to avoiding more than 10 trillion pesos worth of economic losses over the next 4 decades. Under the ARAL Program Act, learning recovery and economic recovery will be achieved together, leading us towards a brighter and more prosperous future for the Filipino youth and our nation as a whole. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I be allowed to co-sponsor?
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is this representation's honor and privilege to co-author and co-sponsor this very important piece of legislation, the Academic Recovery and Accessible Learning Program, or the ARAL program, is a timely and essential intervention. We are faced with perhaps one of the more difficult challenges in the education sector as we give our best shot to address and recover the learning losses incurred by our learners. Excuse me. While various international assessments, such as the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, TIMSS, and the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics, CPLM, have shown that there is a lot more work that needs to be done. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated our education situation. We cannot overemphasize the necessity of providing support to all our learners, particularly in education. The Philippines 2020 Human Capital Index, which the World Bank uses as a measure to determine the amount of human capital that a child born today can expect to attain by age 18, is at 0.52 Mr. President. 0.52, highest at 1, Mr. President. In other words, a Filipino child born 2020 can expect to be 52% as productive when she grows up, Mr. President. One of the factors that affects the Human Capital Index is the learning adjusted years of school, a measure of the actual number of years students learns in school, which is only at 7.5 years, whereas Filipino children are expected to be in school for 12 years, Mr. President. The National Economic and Development Authority projected in 2021 that the total cost of the pandemic is around 41.4 trillion pesos, Mr. President, over the next 40 years. Out of this figure, 11 trillion represents the reduction in future wages and productivity as a result of the suspension of face-to-face classes in school year 2020 to 2021, and lost wages of parents who forgo or reduce work hours to accompany children in online classes. These were 2021 estimates, and based on the hearing conducted by the good sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, we found that the total long-term economic losses now stands at a whopping 74 trillion pesos, Mr. President. Of this figure, 36.1 trillion or 49% accounts for future year investments and returns. 21.6 trillion or 29% for 2 years of school closures, 8.6 trillion pesos or 12% for health, 4.8 trillion pesos or 6% for consumption, and 2.8 trillion pesos or 4% for 2020 investments and its returns. Further compounding these projections is the Asian Development Bank's projection that every year of lost schooling leads to a 10% permanent decrease in future wages. Thus, Mr. President, the problems we face today is not merely a short-term concern, but one that extends for at least a generation. It is of utmost importance that we put in place policies that pertain to addressing the learning losses we incurred before and during the pandemic. This is one of the reasons why over the years, this representation, together with our esteemed colleague, the chairperson of the Committee on Basic Education, Senator Win Gatchalian, worked tirelessly in pushing for various landmark legislations with the goal of improving the education sector, including the Philippine Qualifications Framework Act, RA 10968, the Excellence in Teacher Education Act, RA 11713, the Second Congressional Commission on Education, RA number 11899, among others. And so again, we thank our good sponsor for all his hard work on this bill, together with our esteemed colleagues, Senator Angara, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Pimentel, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, who are all supporters and champion of education in this August chamber. Again, thank you, Mr. President, and may God bless us all.
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senator Jinggoy Estrada's co-sponsorship speech, he requested that it be inserted into the records, Mr. President. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Next to co-sponsor the measure is the distinguished gentleman from Bicol and the Republic of the Philippines, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. I move that he be recognized, Mr. President.
The gentleman from Bicol, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, at sa ating pong pinunong mayorya. A'udhu billahi minasyaitanir rajim, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ginoong Tagapangulo, sa ating mga kasamahan sa bulwagang ito, nais ko pong ipahatid ang aking buong suporta at tiwala sa Senate Bill number 1604 o ang Aral Program Act. Hindi po natin maikakaila na isa ang edukasyon sa mga sektor na lubhang pinadapa ng pandemya sa nakalipas na halos 3 taon. Marami na ring mga pag-aaral ng mga eksperto patungkol sa hindi maiiwasang mga negatibong epekto ng naganap na lockdown at limitasyon sa pisikal na interaksyon sa ating mga mag-aaral. Kasama na po rito ang mental. Kung kaya naman, ang inyong lingkod ay nagagalak sa inisyatiba ng ating minamahal at hinahangaang kasamahan, ang atin pong Einstein ng Senado, Senador Win Gatchalian, sa kanya pong pagsisikap na magsulong ng mga makabuluhang panukala upang iangat ang antas ng edukasyon para sa ating mga kabataan, lalo na po sa karunungang magbasa, magsulat at pagbilang para sa kindergarten at sa mga arilin po ng languages, kasama na po ang Arabic, alhamdulillah. Matematika at siyensya para naman po sa grades 1 and 10. Bilang isang magulang at isang Muslim, batid po ng inyong lingkod ang napakalaking tulong na maihahatid ng pagkakaroon ng sistematikong tutorial sessions para sa ating mga mag-aaral na hindi nagkaroon ng pagkakataong makapag-enroll noong 2020-2021. At mga estudyanteng nahuhuli sa level ng kahusayan sa ating mga pamantayang pang-edukasyon. Naniniwala po ang inyong lingkod na ang edukasyon ay karapatan at hindi pribilehiyo. Sa pamamagitan po ng panukalang ito, binibigyan natin ang bawat kabataan na matamasa ang kanilang karapatan, maabot ang kanilang buong potensyal at maging bahagi ng pag-unlad ng ating lipunan. Muli po, ipinapahayag ko po sa lupon na ito ang aking umaapaw na suporta sa Senate Bill number 1604 sa ilalim ng Committee Report number 17. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay po, Ginoong Tagapangulo.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Cynthia Villar wishes to be made co-author of the measure. I move that she be made co-author of the said measure. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1604 under Committee Report number 17 to allow our colleagues to study the measure.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, January 24, 2023. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, January 24, 2023.